You've been chasing peace in all the wrong places. They told you to stay positive, to take deep breaths, to just be happy. But if it were that simple, why do you still feel overwhelmed by your emotions? Why does your mind spiral at night, replaying old memories, worrying about things you can't control? The truth is, your emotions aren't the problem. It's your relationship with them. And over 2,500 years ago, Buddhism uncovered a way to heal that relationship, not through toxic positivity or mental tricks, but through clarity, compassion, and deep inner stillness. It doesn't ask you to suppress your feelings or pretend to be okay. It teaches you how to understand them, sit with them, and be free from their grip. You don't need to escape your emotions. You need to meet them with wisdom. Buddhism shows you how to feel without being overwhelmed, how to care without clinging, how to let go without becoming cold or numb. And tonight, as you listen to these lessons, something inside you will shift. Your heart will slow. Your thoughts will soften. That tightness in your chest will begin to dissolve, not because the world changed, but because you did. You'll begin to see emotions not as storms to survive, but as waves you can ride with balance and grace. This isn't just another audio to fall asleep to. This is a turning point, a quiet revolution inside your mind, a journey into the deepest layers of yourself where the noise fades and truth begins. Are you ready? Let's begin. So much of your suffering isn't real. It feels real. It feels heavy. It tightens your chest, clouds your thinking, and drains your energy. But what if the pain you carry isn't just from what happened, but from what you told yourself about what happened? That argument you keep replaying in your head, that failure that haunts you at night, that moment of embarrassment that won't stop echoing. It ended long ago, but it still hurts. Why? Because you keep shooting yourself with the second arrow. In Buddhist teaching, there's a powerful idea that most people never learn, and yet it explains so much of our emotional pain. It's the story of the two arrows. The first arrow is life. It's what hits you without warning. A breakup, an illness, a rejection. That's pain. That's natural. But the second arrow, that one is optional. It's the thought that follows, the judgment, the rumination, the why me, the this always happens, the I'll never be okay again. It's not life hurting you anymore. It's you hurting yourself. And this is where transformation begins, not by changing the world, but by noticing when you're picking up the second arrow and choosing not to fire it. Let's go deeper. Think of a time you felt deeply hurt, something unexpected, unfair, or painful. The moment itself was sharp, yes, but how long did it last? A minute? An hour? And how many days, weeks, or even years have you kept that pain alive by replaying it, analyzing it, and attaching meaning to it? We don't just experience pain, we extend it. We stretch it out like a rubber band until it snaps back and stings us again and again. That's the second arrow, and most people are covered in them, walking through life wounded by old thoughts, not new realities. Buddhism teaches that real freedom doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from ending this habit of shooting yourself with extra arrows. But how? First, by seeing it, because you can't drop what you don't realize you're holding. Let's say you fail at something. You lose your job. The first arrow hits, shock, fear, maybe disappointment. That's normal. But immediately after, the second arrow comes flying. I'm not good enough. This always happens to me. I'll never recover. And now you're not just feeling sadness. You're drowning in shame, fear, hopelessness, all because of the story you created after the event. Pain multiplied by thought becomes suffering, and most of us live entirely inside that second layer. But if you pause, if you catch that moment where your mind starts running, something beautiful happens. You start to realize, wait, I just lost my job. That's hard. But that voice telling me I'm worthless? That's not the truth. That's just a habit of thinking. And habits can be changed. Buddhist practice isn't about ignoring reality. It's about meeting it directly, without the extra layer of story. It trains your mind to stay with the first arrow, to acknowledge pain when it comes, but not build a house around it, not decorate it with fear, not replay it on a loop while pretending it's productive. This practice begins with awareness, and awareness is more than thinking. It's noticing. It's that quiet moment when you feel a wave of sadness, and instead of spiraling, you just stay with it. You feel it in your chest. You watch how your body responds. You observe without adding meaning. That silence between the event and your reaction, that is where your freedom lives. And the more you develop this space, the more you reclaim control over your emotions. You don't stop feeling things, you just stop building prisons around them. Now here's something deeper. Why do we shoot the second arrow at all? Because the mind craves meaning. It doesn't like discomfort without a story. So when pain arrives, the mind says, "Let me explain this." It adds blame, assumptions, predictions. But all of this is smoke. The original pain was already fading, but your story kept it burning. You think it's helping, but it's only feeding the fire. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron once said, "You are the sky. Everything else, it's just the weather." When you understand the second arrow, you realize you've been clinging to storms, thinking they define you. But they don't. They pass, if you stop holding on to them. And this doesn't just apply to big traumas. It's everywhere. The way someone cuts you off in traffic and you stay mad for an hour. The way a small comment spirals into self-doubt. The way an old mistake still echoes in your thoughts like it happened yesterday. It's never just the moment, it's the replay. So how do we stop? Start by training your awareness. Noticing in real time when the second arrow appears. That moment when you're feeling sad and thinking, "I shouldn't feel this way." When you're disappointed and telling yourself, "It's because I'm a failure." That's the second arrow sneaking in. Once you catch it, you don't need to fight it. You just need to see it. Buddhism calls this sati, mindfulness. It means seeing clearly, being awake, even for a few seconds, to what's really happening. And when you become mindful of your emotional habits, you start to change them, not by force, but by no longer feeding them. You stop buying into the voice that says, "This means I'm broken." You start responding with a deeper voice, one that says, "This is pain, it will pass." And that shift, that's everything. Because once you stop identifying with your suffering, it begins to loosen its grip. And this is where true compassion comes in, not just for others, but for yourself. Most people carry around old wounds like they're proof of who they are. But the truth is, you don't need to prove anything. You don't need to punish yourself to grow. You don't need to keep stabbing yourself to stay safe. Self-torment never led anyone to wisdom. Only kindness can do that. Buddhism doesn't tell you to toughen up. It invites you to soften, to see your pain without flinching and without embellishing, to be fully present with it, and in doing so, to stop adding more. Let's take an even closer look at the mechanics. There's a moment, maybe just a split second, between stimulus and response, between something painful happening and your emotional reaction. That's the seed of the second arrow. If you're not aware, it takes root. It grows fast. It wraps around your mind, your body, your mood. But if you become still, if you breathe, if you pause, if you just observe, it never takes hold. Instead of reacting, you respond. And response comes from presence, not panic. In this space, your whole experience changes. You might feel anxiety rising, but instead of spiraling into, "What if this never ends?" you say, "Ah, anxiety, here you are." You don't judge it. You don't push it away. You just witness it, like clouds moving across the sky, and you'll notice something shocking. When you stop clinging to a feeling, when you stop calling it good or bad, right or wrong, it dissolves faster. It doesn't stick. It visits, then leaves, like a guest who doesn't stay too long. This is the heart of the second arrow lesson. Pain is real, but suffering is a choice, and that choice lives in how you relate to your emotions. Let's go even further. Think of the second arrow as emotional inertia. The mind hits a bump in the road, but instead of just absorbing the shock, it builds a whole highway of thoughts around it. This always happens. This is who I am. This means it'll never get better. But what if none of that is true? What if the event meant nothing more than what it was? A job lost, just a job lost. A relationship ending, just that. A tough day, not a sign of a doomed life, but simply a tough day. When you strip away the story, what's left is just a moment, a wave, and no wave ever lasted forever. The reason this teaching is so powerful is because it gives you your power back. You don't need the world to stop being painful. You just need to stop creating extra pain inside it. You become someone who can face discomfort without collapsing, who can feel grief without turning it into identity, who can walk through chaos and stay clear because you no longer let the second arrow find its mark. And yes, it takes practice. This is not a one-time realization. It's a way of living, a daily decision to stay present, to stay kind, to stop participating in your own suffering. That moment when you pause, breathe, let go of the thought trying to take you down a dark road. That's not weakness. That's strength. That's wisdom. That's the beginning of emotional freedom. And slowly, it becomes a habit of peace, a habit of awareness, a habit of choosing clarity over chaos, stillness over spiraling. And eventually, you become someone others look at and wonder, how are they so calm in the middle of everything? But you'll know, it's not because life got easier. It's because you stopped firing the second arrow. You started meeting life as it is, not as your fear painted it. You became free. And as we go forward, as you drift deeper into this journey, you'll learn even more tools, even more clarity. But it all starts here, with the moment you stopped believing everything your mind said and started seeing your emotions as visitors, not masters. The second arrow loses its power when you become the one who watches, not the one who reacts. And from this place, everything begins to change. And once you stop firing the second arrow, once you stop turning pain into a story, you begin to notice something else. Beneath the emotions, beneath the reactions, there's stillness, a quiet center, a place inside you that's untouched by chaos. But here's the next trap your mind sets. It wants to hold on to that stillness. It wants to keep peace like a possession. It clings even to the absence of clinging. And just like that, suffering sneaks back in, wearing a different mask. That's the next lesson Buddhism whispers to those who are ready. That freedom is not just about avoiding pain, it's about letting go of the need to hold on to anything at all. We think that attachment means love, that holding on means care, that if we don't grip tightly, we'll lose what matters. But the truth is the opposite. The tighter you cling, the more you suffer. And the more you suffer, the more you distort love, turning it into control, turning care into fear. The heart of this lesson is subtle. It's not about indifference. It's not about shutting down or walking away from life. That's not what Buddhism means by non-attachment. The paradox is this: to truly love, you must let go. To truly feel peace, you must stop grasping for it. Non-attachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop clinging. You allow everything, joy, sadness, love, fear, to come and go like waves. You stop holding your breath, trying to freeze perfect moments or avoid uncomfortable ones. You open your hands and let life flow through. Because everything you love will change. Every person you care about will grow, evolve, move away, or someday leave. And this isn't a cause for despair. It's the doorway to real emotional freedom. When you love someone with attachment, fear creeps in. You try to control them. You worry about losing them. You carry the weight of every text message, every silence, every mistake. But when you love without attachment, something changes. You love fully, but lightly. You care deeply, but freely. You want the best for them, but not at the cost of your peace. Buddhism calls this non-attached compassion. It's not cold, it's not distant, it's warm, open, and grounded. It says, I see your pain, I care, but I will not drown in it. Think about how often your emotions spiral not because of what someone did, but because of what you expected them to do. You expected them to understand, to respond, to be different. And when they weren't, you suffered. Not just because of the event, but because of the grip your mind had on how things should have been. Non-attachment is the ability to care without that grip, to live with love but without demand, to show up fully but not as a hostage to the outcome. This is what makes it powerful and difficult, because we've been taught to link love with ownership, happiness with security, peace with control. But control is an illusion. People will change, plans will fall apart, emotions will rise and fall like weather. And that's where the practice deepens. When you stop trying to make life permanent, you begin to see clearly. You stop clenching your fists and you open to what is, not what you wanted, not what you feared, just what's here. And in that space, emotions still come. You still feel joy, sorrow, love, loss, but they don't drown you. They pass through like wind through an open window. You begin to notice that suffering is not caused by what happens. It's caused by how tightly you grip what's already moving. Let's look deeper. Non-attachment is rooted in wisdom, the wisdom of impermanence. Everything changes. That's not a tragedy, it's reality. And when you understand this fully, in your bones, your heart becomes more resilient. You stop needing things to stay the same. You stop needing people to behave a certain way to feel okay. You stop tying your inner peace to outer events. It's like a tree with deep roots. Storms may come, the wind may howl, but the tree remains grounded, not by resisting, but by bending, by adapting, by being rooted in something deeper than the surface. And this is where emotional mastery truly begins. Because what most people call love is often just emotional dependence. I need you to behave a certain way so I can feel okay. That's not love. That's fear in disguise. And fear creates attachment. Attachment creates suffering. When you love someone with non-attachment, you're not less invested. You're more present. You're free to love them as they are, not your idea of them. You're not trapped in disappointment when they change. You're not lost when they struggle. You stand beside them, steady. And this doesn't just apply to relationships. We cling to identities, to status, to outcomes. I need to succeed, or I'm a failure. I need them to respect me, or I'm not enough. These are attachments. They tie your emotional state to something outside your control, and the more you cling, the more anxious you become. But when you loosen the grip, something beautiful happens. You start to experience life directly, without filters, without constant mental commentary. You stop living in your head and start being here. And this doesn't mean you stop caring about goals, people, or growth. It means you stop suffering when things don't go your way. Non-attachment gives you power, not power over others, but power over yourself. You stop chasing peace like a prize and start realizing it's already here, underneath the grasping. This is where non-attached compassion becomes your superpower. Because when you no longer fear emotional discomfort, you can hold space for others without losing yourself. You can sit with someone's pain without needing to fix it. You can feel sadness without it becoming your identity. And this is incredibly rare. Most people, when faced with emotional intensity, either absorb it or push it away. They either become consumed by others' pain or shut down completely. But Buddhism teaches a middle path, a spacious presence. You feel deeply, but you don't lose your center. This is emotional maturity. This is what it means to be anchored. And it's not something you fake. It's something you become. Through practice, through awareness, through daily choices to release your grip and return to presence. You'll start to notice when your mind attaches. You'll catch the moment when joy arises and you think, I hope this lasts. That's attachment. You'll notice when fear comes and your mind says, this must not happen. That's attachment. In that moment, you have a choice, to tense up or to soften, to cling or to let go. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means trusting that you'll be okay, even if life doesn't go according to your plan. And the more you practice, the more this becomes second nature. Let's go even deeper. Non-attachment is not detachment. Detachment is closing the heart. Non-attachment is keeping it wide open. Detachment says, I don't care what happens. Non-attachment says, I'll love fully, no matter what happens. Detachment is armor. Non-attachment is freedom. And this difference changes everything. Because the world doesn't need more numb people. It needs more people who can feel without falling apart, who can care without clinging, who can show up without needing to control every outcome. You become someone others trust, not because you fix their problems, but because you're not afraid of their emotions, because your calm is rooted in something deeper than conditions. And that calm is contagious. It spreads. It creates safe spaces. It transforms relationships. It gives others permission to feel and heal without pressure or panic. This is how non-attachment changes the emotional landscape of your life. You'll stop panicking when things don't go as planned. You'll stop collapsing when someone misunderstands you. You'll stop needing closure from people who can't give it. You'll start walking lightly, living presently, and loving openly. And slowly, the noise quiets. Your mind doesn't chase every emotion. Your heart doesn't contract with every fear. Your peace becomes less fragile, more stable, more real. And when that happens, you'll look back and realize, letting go didn't cost you anything. It gave you everything. You'll see that clinging was never love. That fear was never protection. That control was never security. And in that seeing, you'll be free. Free to feel, free to care, free to live, without needing to hold on so tightly. This is the paradox. that in letting go, you finally get to experience the depth of life, not as a hostage, not as a puppet, but as a witness, a participant, a presence, fully here, fully you, and finally, at peace. Letting go doesn't mean losing yourself. It means discovering that who you thought you were was never fixed to begin with. And once you release that grip, once you stop clinging to people, outcomes, and emotions, the question naturally arises, then who am I? If I'm not my feelings, not my reactions, not the stories I've told myself, what's left? This is where Buddhism hands you the key to one of its most powerful insights. You are not a solid thing. You are not a single self. You are a process, a flow, and what you've called me is actually a bundle of parts moving together like a river. The teachings call this bundle the 5 aggregates, not pieces of a soul, not fixed traits, but 5 processes, always changing, always interacting. And the more clearly you see these parts, the more power you gain over your emotional life. Because emotions are not mysterious forces, they're puzzles, and every puzzle can be taken apart. Let's start with form. This is the body, the physical aspect of your existence. It includes your muscles, bones, heartbeat, breath, and even your facial expressions. Often, we experience emotions as sensations in the body, tightness in the chest, butterflies in the stomach, tension in the jaw. And yet we rarely stop to ask, what does this physical sensation actually mean? The body feels something, but the meaning we assign to it, that comes later. By observing form, we start to see how much of what we call an emotion is actually just a physical reaction. You feel your shoulders rise and label it as stress. You feel warmth in your chest and call it love. But the feeling came first. The body speaks before the mind does. So instead of chasing the thoughts, start with the body. Sit with the sensations. Let them speak without rushing to define them. Often, they pass on their own. Next comes sensation. This is the raw data, the initial feeling of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that arises when you experience something. It's the first flash before interpretation. You hear a sound, taste a flavor, read a message. Instantly, your system reacts. But sensation is not emotion. Sensation is quick, simple, like a spark. What happens after? That's where things get layered. Most people don't pause between sensation and interpretation. They react. They get a slightly unpleasant tone in someone's voice and suddenly feel rejected. But the rejection wasn't in the voice. It was in what followed, in the third aggregate, perception. Perception is where the mind starts to name things. It labels. It recognizes patterns. It says, that tone reminds me of when I was ignored, or that look means they don't like me. Perception pulls from memory. It grabs meaning from the past and throws it on the present. This is useful. It helps us navigate the world, but it also builds illusions, because sometimes you're not reacting to what's happening. You're reacting to what your mind thinks is happening. So many emotional spirals start here. You hear one word and your mind builds a whole story. That person must be mad at me. I must have done something wrong. It happens fast. But perception isn't truth. It's interpretation. And interpretations can be wrong. Now we arrive at mental formations. This is where it gets deeper. Mental formations are habits of thought, belief, and intention. They include your tendencies, how you react to certain situations, how you see yourself, what assumptions you've built over time. These are not random. They're shaped by your past, your culture, your experiences, and they shape how you feel. If you've been told you're not good enough, That belief becomes a lens. Every small failure will feel 10 times heavier. Every compliment will seem suspicious. That's the power of mental formations. They color everything. But here's the good news. They can be changed. Just like a path formed in the grass from years of walking, a mental formation is a pattern. If you stop walking it, the grass grows back, and you can choose a different path. You can build new formations, compassion, patience, resilience, by practicing them daily, just like a muscle. Finally, there's consciousness. This is the awareness that experiences all the other aggregates. It's not a thing you can touch. It's more like the space in which everything else appears. Consciousness knows the body. It sees the sensations. It observes the perceptions. It watches the thoughts come and go. But it's not bound to them. And this is the most freeing insight of all. Your consciousness is not your emotions. It's the witness, the open sky where weather moves but doesn't stick. The more you identify with that space, the awareness itself, the less you get pulled into emotional storms. You don't suppress them, you just stop confusing them for who you are. All 5 aggregates are temporary. None of them stay the same from moment to moment. Your body ages, your sensations shift, your perceptions evolve, your thoughts come and go. Your awareness, even that, flickers with attention. So when you say, "I'm angry," what do you actually mean? Your body feels heat. Your mind labels a sensation. A thought arises. A belief kicks in. But there's no single I in all of that. There's no fixed thing called anger either. It's just a combination of processes. And when you see this clearly, the emotion begins to lose its grip. Because you stop seeing it as you. You start seeing it as an event, something that arises, stays a while, then passes. Think of it like a machine. A light turns on, a gear moves, a bell rings. But none of these parts define the machine. They're just activities happening inside it. That's what your emotional life is. Not a fixed self, but a dance of parts. And the more you observe those parts, the more choice you have. This is not about detaching from life. It's about engaging with it more skillfully. When you understand the aggregates, you can respond instead of react. You can say, my body feels tight. My thoughts are racing. That old belief is showing up again." And in that space, you gain power. You don't have to believe everything you feel. You don't have to act on every emotion. You can sit, you can breathe, you can watch. And in that watching, the puzzle starts to dissolve. Emotional overwhelm begins to feel like what it really is, a pile of pieces you don't have to carry all at once. This understanding also dissolves shame, because when you know emotions are not who you are, you stop judging yourself for having them. You stop thinking, "I shouldn't feel this way," and start asking, "Where is this coming from?" That shift turns guilt into curiosity. It transforms inner conflict into inner insight. Buddhism teaches not to cling to the aggregates, but not to reject them either. They're part of the human experience. The key is to see them clearly, to know them as processes, not identities. This clarity builds emotional strength, because the moment you stop taking emotions personally, they lose their sting. And yes, it takes practice. This isn't an intellectual trick. It's something you train through mindfulness, through observing your inner world without rushing to explain it, through sitting with your experience part by part, until you realize nothing inside you is permanent and nothing needs to be feared. You may still feel sadness, anger, fear, joy, but you meet them as visitors. You treat them with respect, but not as rulers. You allow them, but you don't obey them. You watch them move through the aggregates, and you stay grounded in the awareness behind it all. This is emotional maturity, not built on suppression, but on understanding. And something else happens when you live this way. You begin to see others differently too. You realize they are also made of these 5 aggregates. Their anger is a mix of sensation and perception, not a personal attack. Their fear is a mental formation, not a character flaw. You start to respond with compassion because you see the mechanics. You understand that no one is fixed. Everyone is changing, moment to moment. This is what makes Buddhist psychology so powerful. It doesn't give you a label to wear. It gives you a map, a way to navigate emotions without drowning in them, a way to understand pain without turning it into identity. And in that understanding, you find space. Space to feel without being overwhelmed. Space to grow without pressure. Space to be human without judgment. You begin to live more freely. You no longer say, "I am my sadness," but "Sadness is visiting right now." You stop clinging to happiness as a possession and start appreciating it as a passing breeze. You don't become cold or detached. You become steady, calm in motion, grounded in change. Because now you know you were never one fixed thing. You were never the storm. You were always the sky. And with that knowing, everything starts to feel lighter. And when you begin to see yourself as a process, not a fixed identity, you start to loosen your grip on every passing feeling. Sadness becomes a movement, not a label. Fear becomes a signal, not a sentence. Anger passes like wind through the trees. But even after breaking your emotions into these 5 parts, there's still something deeper to uncover. Because even though emotions seem real, solid and powerful, what if that's just how they appear, not what they actually are? What if the emotions you've spent your life fighting, fearing, or chasing have no core at all? This is where the Buddhist teaching of emptiness, shunyata, steps in, gently but profoundly. It says that everything we experience, including emotions, is empty. Not in the sense of being meaningless or hollow, but empty of a fixed, independent, lasting identity. Emptiness means interdependence. It means that things don't arise on their own. They are the result of causes and conditions, of context and perception. Nothing exists by itself, not even your emotions. This understanding shifts everything. Think about it. You feel a strong emotion and instantly assume it's real, personal, and says something essential about who you are. You feel anxious and think, "I am anxious." You feel rejected and think, "They don't love me." You feel angry and say, "I can't control myself." But those conclusions only make sense if emotions are solid things with clear meaning. Emptiness reveals they're not. Let's take fear. Fear arises, but not randomly. It depends on certain conditions, your past experiences, your expectations, your physical state, the people around you, even the time of day. All these things shape whether fear appears, how strong it is, and how long it stays. But none of them are fear on their own. Fear is just a result, a temporary mix, a cloud formed by the wind. And just like a cloud, once the conditions change, it dissolves. This doesn't make your feelings less real in the moment. It makes them less binding. You can feel deeply without being trapped, because now you understand what's happening. Emotions don't define you. They don't come from a permanent you. They come from causes, some of which you can't see, many of which you didn't choose. When you see this, the emotion no longer sticks to you. It becomes lighter. You don't push it away, but you stop clinging to it. This is not a denial of emotion. It's a clear seeing. Shunyata is the clarity that emotions are events, not truths. They are dependent. They are constructed. And if something is constructed, it can be deconstructed. That means no matter how big or overwhelming a feeling seems, it's not unchangeable. It's not eternal. It doesn't have power unless you feed it with belief. Take sorrow, for example. It may feel like it comes from your core, like it belongs to you. But where did it begin? Maybe with a memory, a thought, a glance, a moment of comparison. Then came the sensation, the body's tightening, the mind's interpretation. And now you say, I'm sad. But all that sadness is a flow of causes, a ripple. When you look closely, there's no single thing to point to and say, this is sadness. It's just movement. You might feel love. It warms the heart. You think, this is who I am. But that love came from somewhere too. A word, a smile, a memory, a connection. When the conditions are there, the feeling arises. When they change, the feeling shifts. Love is not a permanent state. It's not a possession. It's not yours or theirs. It's a phenomenon. Beautiful, yes, but still empty of solidity. This helps you deal with change in a powerful way, because if emotions were permanent, then losing someone you love would mean permanent heartbreak. If sadness were fixed, it would mean lifelong suffering. But emotions arise and pass because they are not rooted in something unchanging. They are like echoes, only loud if something responds to them. You don't need to force this belief. You can test it through observation. Next time a strong emotion comes, ask, what's holding this up? What's feeding it? What would happen if I stopped believing the thoughts that come with it? What would remain? You might be surprised. The storm begins to clear, not because you suppressed the emotion, but because you stopped seeing it as real in the way your mind assumed. And this applies to positive emotions too. Even joy is empty. That's not a bad thing. It means joy is accessible. It can be created. It doesn't require a perfect life or external permission. You don't need to wait for joy to strike randomly. Since it arises from conditions, you can cultivate those conditions. Gratitude, stillness, presence, generosity. These aren't magical fixes, they're causes. They make the space for joy to appear, just as rumination, tension, and expectation make the space for anxiety. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of Buddhist thought. People hear emptiness and think coldness, detachment, or indifference. But shunyata is none of those things. It's freedom. It means you're not trapped in your emotions. You're not imprisoned by them. You can feel deeply and let go quickly. You can experience everything and be ruled by nothing. You stop thinking, I am this sadness. Instead, you see, sadness is here. That shift from identity to observation is the doorway. It breaks the illusion of permanence. It turns storms into breezes. And there's more. When you understand that your emotions are empty of independent self, you begin to understand the same is true for the emotions of others. Someone lashes out in anger. It's not about you. It's about their causes and conditions, their history, their fears, their pain. When someone pulls away or gets cold, it's not necessarily because of something you did. Their reaction is shaped by layers you can't see. Their emotions, just like yours, are not personal. They're not solid. This understanding unlocks compassion, real compassion, the kind that doesn't require agreement or understanding, just space. You hold space for someone else's emotion the same way you hold space for your own, without grabbing it, without rejecting it. You don't need to analyze everything you feel. You don't need to be at war with it. You simply become curious. You notice. You sit with it. And by sitting with it, you give it room to soften. This is the deep effect of shunyata on emotional life. You stop believing every story. You stop reacting to every wave. And most importantly, you stop identifying with the emotional content of your mind. You stop saying, "This is who I am," and start saying, "This is what's passing through." You'll find that even intense emotions lose their force when you see their lack of core. The tighter you cling, the stronger they stay. The more lightly you hold them, the more quickly they shift. It's like grasping at smoke. The tighter your grip, the more frustrated you become. But when you open your hand, the smoke moves on. This doesn't mean you ignore your emotions. It means you stop giving them more reality than they deserve. When something feels unbearable, you can look at it directly and say, "This is made of parts. It came together under certain conditions. It will pass." That's not avoidance, that's insight. That's stability born from wisdom. And there's something else. Emptiness brings responsibility. Because if emotions don't come from a fixed self, then you're not doomed to repeat the same patterns. You're not stuck. You're not broken. You're free to choose new causes, to water new seeds, to create different responses. The future is open. Shunyata removes the weight of fatalism. You're not at the mercy of your emotional history. You're the gardener. What you plant, you grow. What you nourish becomes strong. What you let go of fades. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, remember this. No emotion is final. No feeling is fixed. They are weather patterns, not prisons. Clouds, not cages. Even the ones that seem unbearable, guilt, jealousy, shame, are just constructs. They feel sharp because you believe they're true. But truth has no need to shout. It just is. And this insight, when practiced over time, builds unshakable confidence. You stop needing to fix every emotion. You stop fearing them. You start walking with them, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, but always knowing this too has no core. That knowing becomes your center, not cold, not empty in a lifeless way, empty in the way space is empty, vast, open, free. And in that space, you find the room to breathe, to move, to feel fully without being fooled. When you stop mistaking emotions for truth, when you see that they have no core, something powerful happens. You begin to ask deeper questions, not just, "What am I feeling?" but "Where did this come from?" You start tracing your emotions back through time, like following a thread through a tangled knot. And what you find is not one single cause, but a chain, a process, a pattern. Buddhism teaches that emotions do not just appear out of nowhere. They unfold through dependent origination, a 12-link cycle that explains how everything we feel, think, and believe arises step by step. Each moment leads to the next. Each cause gives birth to an effect. And once you understand this cycle, you stop being a victim of emotion. You gain foresight. You gain the power to step out before the pattern traps you again. This isn't abstract theory. It's a map of your mind. And if you've ever felt confused by how fast emotions take over, this is the clarity you've been waiting for. The first link is ignorance. But this doesn't mean lack of intelligence. It means not seeing clearly, not understanding the nature of reality, of impermanence, of emptiness. When you live in ignorance, you cling to what will change, you resist what must pass, and you suffer unnecessarily. Ignorance is the root because it sets everything else in motion. It's the moment you believe a fleeting thought is who you are, the moment you believe your pain is permanent. From ignorance comes mental formations. These are your tendencies, how your mind has been shaped, your habits of thought, your emotional reflexes, your stored reactions from past experiences. If you've been through rejection, for example, your mind forms a blueprint. Later, even small situations can trigger that stored pain. You're not reacting to what's in front of you. You're reacting to that deep formation, running in the background like a script. Mental formations lead to consciousness, not pure awareness, but the kind of consciousness that is colored by your conditioning. The way you wake up into each moment with bias already built in. The mind that is ready to interpret, assume, and judge often before you've even noticed. This consciousness is already flavored by your past, your beliefs, your fears. Next is name and form, your mental and physical existence. The way your mind gives names to things and your body responds. When an emotion arises, you label it. You say, "This is anger, this is fear," and your body reacts in kind. The heart races, the breath shortens, the muscles tense. The mind and body reinforce each other in a loop. You name the feeling and the body believes it. The body reacts and the mind confirms it. From name and form comes the 6 sense bases, your senses and the mind that processes them. Every experience you have comes through sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. These are the gateways through which the world enters. But they don't just transmit neutral data. They carry with them old stories, old emotions, old meanings. A smell reminds you of someone you lost. A word sounds like an insult from childhood. A silence feels like abandonment. The senses are not simple. They're soaked in memory. Then comes contact. This is when one of the senses meets an object, and consciousness arises around it. You see a face, hear a tone, feel a shift in temperature, and something in you reacts. Contact seems small, but it's the spark, the beginning of every emotional fire. It's not the world itself, it's your meeting with it. Contact gives rise to feeling, not big emotions, but initial tones, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Before your mind adds a story, your body already has a sense. It says, "This feels good, this feels bad, this feels empty." These subtle tones color your next move. They're the emotional seeds. From feeling comes craving. This is where suffering really begins to grow. When something feels good, you want to hold on to it. When something feels bad, you want to push it away. You crave pleasure and fear pain. But both reactions are attachments. You're already leaning forward or pulling back. You're not present. You're reaching, grasping, avoiding. Craving leads to clinging. It's deeper now. Not just desire, but attachment. Not just discomfort, but identification. You don't just want peace. You believe you need it to survive. You don't just dislike sadness. You believe it's wrong to feel it. Clinging is where thoughts turn into obsessions, where discomfort becomes panic, where emotions stick like glue. Then comes becoming. This is identity forming. You don't just feel anger, you become an angry person. You don't just feel fear, you become someone who is always afraid. This is the creation of the emotional self, the I am that builds itself out of reaction. And once that identity takes shape, it fuels every moment after. Becoming gives rise to birth, the birth of the self in this emotional cycle. Not literal birth, but the moment you fully step into that emotional identity. You live through it, act from it, speak from it, suffer through it. It becomes your lens. And finally, birth leads to aging and death, the decay of that emotional self, the exhaustion, the collapse, the moment you can't hold the feeling anymore and it fades, leaving behind confusion, regret, or emptiness. And then, often without noticing, the cycle begins again. Ignorance returns. A new formation rises. The chain repeats. This 12-link chain is happening all the time, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, sometimes in seconds, sometimes over days or years. But once you start seeing it, you can interrupt it. You can step off the ride before it runs you in circles again. You notice when craving starts. You catch clinging before it becomes identity. You recognize that what you're feeling isn't coming from the moment. It's coming from layers of conditions. And in that space, you regain choice. You don't need to fight the emotion. You need to trace it back. See where it came from. See that it's not solid, that it's not isolated, that it's not about now, but about habit. And this takes practice, not a single moment of insight, but repeated watching. You sit in silence and you feel something arise. Instead of reacting, you ask, "Where did this come from?" And you wait. You let the answer unfold, not through thinking, but through seeing. Over time, this becomes a way of life. You become someone who sees emotion as a process, not a problem, as a signal, not an identity. You become less reactive because you see the whole pattern. You stop being shocked by your own mind. You expect it to move. You expect it to shift. And when it does, you're ready. You let go earlier. You cling less tightly. You speak more carefully. You hold others with more patience. Because now you know, it's not personal. It's not final. It's not you. It's just the cycle. And in seeing it clearly, you gain freedom, not by cutting out emotion, but by cutting the chain that makes it unbearable. You become a witness, not a prisoner. A participant, not a puppet. And from that space, peace becomes natural, not because life stops moving, but because you've learned to move with it, without confusion, without grasping, without getting lost. This is foresight. This is power. This is how freedom begins. Once you start seeing the 12 links of dependent origination clearly, something shifts. You stop blaming the present for emotions rooted in the past. You stop seeing pain as random or personal. You begin to notice how your own mind builds the reactions you suffer from. But even with this insight, another question emerges. Why do these patterns keep coming back? Why, even after so much awareness, do the same moods, thoughts, and struggles return like clockwork? The answer lies in something deeper than habit. It lies in the very cycle of samsara. Most people hear the word samsara and think of literal rebirth, life after death. But in Buddhist psychology, samsara is much more than that. It's not just being reborn in a new body, it's being reborn in the same emotional state again and again, even in the same lifetime. It's waking up in the same mindset, repeating the same emotional loops, reacting to life in the same painful ways, no matter how many times you promise yourself not to. Samsara is emotional repetition. It's not just where you go when you die. It's where you keep going while you're still alive. It happens every time anger arises, and instead of observing it, you fuel it. Every time anxiety shows up, and instead of allowing it, you believe it. Every time longing returns, and instead of understanding it, you chase the next thing thinking it will finally satisfy you. This is the emotional treadmill. You walk for years, but you stay in place. You feel change is happening, but your inner world stays painfully familiar. You might change your environment, your relationships, your job, but your mind keeps dragging you back into the same feelings: frustration, loneliness, restlessness, shame. Samsara hijacks your mood by making suffering feel normal. It tricks you into thinking emotional pain is just part of who you are, rather than something you're unconsciously recreating. It keeps you believing that relief is always in the next moment, the next decision, the next achievement. But no matter what changes on the outside, the cycle on the inside continues unless it's broken with awareness. One of the ways samsara holds you is through emotional inertia. You wake up feeling a certain way, maybe a little off, a little low, and instead of questioning it, you move with it. You feed it with thoughts, memories, expectations. That low mood shapes your choices, how you interpret people's words, how you react to small frustrations. Before you know it, your whole day is built around a feeling that might not have lasted more than a few minutes if you hadn't followed it. Emotional repetition often happens because we mistake familiarity for truth. You've felt anxiety so many times, your mind starts to believe it's who you are. You've repeated thoughts of unworthiness for years, so they feel like facts instead of echoes. Samsara thrives on these loops because they feel natural. Even pain can feel safe if it's predictable. To escape samsara, you don't need to escape your life. You need to escape the automatic. You need to see what you're repeating, not just what you're feeling, but how you respond to those feelings. Start noticing which moods drag you down consistently. Is it the way you collapse into hopelessness when things don't go your way? Is it the bitterness that flares when you're not seen or appreciated? Is it the craving that returns every time life gets quiet? These aren't random, they're part of your emotional rebirth cycle. And each time you react the same way, samsara tightens its grip. This doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It means you're human, but it also means you have a choice. You can begin by meeting your oldest emotional patterns with fresh attention. Next time anxiety rises, instead of going into your usual story, pause. Feel it in your body. Let it be a sensation, not a sentence. Notice what it wants you to do. Run, fix, hide, and don't move. Just see it. When sadness pulls you into familiar thought spirals, take a breath. Don't argue with the thoughts. Don't try to fix the feeling. Just trace it. Where is it coming from? What belief is underneath it? What reaction does it want from you? Every time you interrupt the cycle, even briefly, you weaken samsara's hold. You start to break the momentum of the past. And the key isn't dramatic action. It's small moments of presence. Those moments build into a new path. Another way samsara hijacks your mood is through emotional identity. You start to define yourself by how you feel. You say, I'm an anxious person, or I've always been emotionally sensitive, or this is just the way I am. But those aren't facts. They're repetitions. They're roles you've worn for so long you forgot you could take them off. Buddhism invites you to challenge this idea of a fixed self, to ask, who is this I that's always angry, always longing, always afraid? When you look closely, you don't find a solid person. You find habits, patterns, memories, but no permanent core. This is liberating. It means you're not doomed to feel this way forever. The self you were yesterday isn't the self you have to be tomorrow. The mood you woke up in doesn't have to shape your whole day. The past doesn't get to write the future unless you hand it the pen. And yet, samsara keeps you busy. It feeds you with distraction. When discomfort arises, it tells you to check your phone, eat something, start a new project, chase a new relationship. It keeps you searching for external change so you don't have to feel internal discomfort. But this search is a loop. The momentary relief wears off. The underlying feeling returns. The cycle starts again. The only true way out is to stop running, to stay, to feel, to witness the cycle instead of spinning with it. This takes courage, because presence can be uncomfortable at first. You have to face the moods you've been escaping for years. You have to watch the part of you that wants to numb out or lash out or disappear. But that watching, that stillness, is exactly what ends the loop. Samsara can't survive stillness. It feeds on reaction. It needs you to keep moving, to keep chasing or resisting. The moment you stop, the pattern starts to lose energy. The craving feels less urgent. The anger starts to dissolve. The sadness becomes something you can hold instead of something that holds you. And in this holding, you find your power. Not the kind that dominates or controls, but the kind that sees clearly. The kind that recognizes, this emotion has come before, and I've survived it. I don't have to obey it. Samsara also shows up in your relationships. You might find yourself drawn to the same kinds of people. You replay old arguments. You expect abandonment. You crave approval. You fear being seen too clearly. These are not accidents. They're karmic loops. And karma in Buddhism isn't punishment. It's momentum. What's repeated tends to continue until awareness steps in. So notice your emotional habits around others. Do you shrink when someone raises their voice? Do you over-explain when you feel misunderstood? Do you withdraw when things get intimate? Each reaction is a thread in your samsaric web, and each thread can be loosened. You do this by practicing something radically simple: non-reaction, not apathy, not detachment, but the willingness to be with discomfort without feeding it. When you can feel disappointment and not rush to numb it, you're breaking samsara. When you can hear criticism and not collapse into shame, you're cutting the cycle. When you can be with longing and not chase its object, you're stepping off the wheel. And as you do this more, a different rhythm emerges, a new kind of inner silence, a steadiness. You stop waiting for emotions to disappear. You stop needing to be fixed. You just meet yourself where you are, again and again, with honesty and gentleness. This is the path out of emotional repetition, not by erasing your feelings, but by seeing through the automatic responses they use to trigger. Not by becoming someone else, but by remembering you were never your reactions to begin with. Samsara loses its power when you realize you are not your mood, you are not your history, you are not your craving. You are the awareness that sees all of it. And awareness doesn't cling, it doesn't spiral, it doesn't repeat, it simply sees. And that seeing is your liberation. When you begin to interrupt the emotional cycles of samsara, something unexpected happens. The highs don't sweep you away, and the lows don't drag you under. There's a quiet strength that begins to grow, a kind of stillness that doesn't depend on your mood, your past, or the approval of others. It's not numbness. It's not distance. It's deeper than calm. It's the beginning of equanimity. Equanimity is often misunderstood. People think it means being unaffected or emotionally flat. But in Buddhist practice, equanimity, upekkha, is anything but empty. It's full. It's alive. It's a steady presence that allows you to face joy and grief, success and failure, gain and loss, without being ruled by any of them. This state doesn't come from forcing yourself to be neutral. It comes from insight. It grows as you begin to see the changing nature of everything, and you stop chasing what won't last or fearing what will pass. Equanimity is built, not born. It's not a personality trait. It's a cultivated strength. When you're trapped in emotional reactivity, everything feels urgent. Every thought seems important. Every mood feels like it must be obeyed. But when equanimity develops, space opens. You no longer feel pushed around by your feelings. The storm might still come, but it doesn't enter you the same way. You don't collapse into it. You observe it from a grounded place. This doesn't make you distant from life. It brings you closer to its truth. Equanimity begins with understanding that every experience arises and passes. Even the most overwhelming feelings have a lifespan. They begin, they peak, they fade. But when you're caught in reactivity, it doesn't feel that way. The emotion feels like forever. The thought feels like fact. Equanimity sees through that illusion. It reminds you that no feeling is final, and that reminder changes everything. This strength comes from balance. It's not about removing emotion, it's about not being possessed by it. You can still feel sadness without sinking. You can still feel anger without exploding. You can still feel excitement without clinging. The difference is that you're not leaning too far in any direction. You're steady in the middle. To build equanimity, you must begin by recognizing your emotional tipping points. Notice when you get pulled into extremes, when pleasure makes you greedy, when discomfort makes you panicked, when praise makes you grasp, when criticism makes you shrink. These are the cracks where balance breaks, and it's in those cracks that equanimity must be planted. One of the most powerful tools for growing this inner strength is the contemplation of impermanence. When you truly accept that every experience is temporary, you stop attaching yourself to it. You stop expecting happiness to stay forever, or pain to mean you've failed. You begin to meet life on its own terms, not yours. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you wise. You can still act, still care, still show up fully, but without losing yourself in the outcome. When something beautiful happens, you enjoy it without gripping it. When something painful happens, you feel it without falling apart. Equanimity allows you to be intimate with life without being consumed by it. It's helpful to understand equanimity as one of the Brahma Viharas, the 4 divine abodes in Buddhism. The others are loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. Equanimity is the foundation that keeps these other qualities from tipping into imbalance. Without it, kindness can become attachment, compassion can become burnout, and joy can become jealousy. With equanimity, they stay steady, they grow cleanly. Equanimity doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without conditions. You help someone without needing them to change. You love someone without needing them to love you back in a specific way. You feel deeply, but you don't build your identity on those feelings. This is what makes it radical. In a world obsessed with getting what it wants and avoiding what it doesn't, equanimity steps out of the game. It's not detachment. Detachment pulls away. Equanimity leans in, with awareness, with clarity, with the understanding that everything is fluid and that trying to control it will only increase suffering. To cultivate this state, begin by watching how your mind reacts to change. When something pleasant arises, what thoughts follow? Are you trying to hold on to it? Are you already fearing its loss? When something difficult arises, do you try to escape it? Do you label it as wrong, unfair, or permanent? These reactions are the moments when you fall out of balance. Instead of following them, pause. Sit. Let the feeling rise and fall without interference. Meet it like a wave, rising, cresting, falling back into the ocean. Don't resist it. Don't chase it. Just stay. That staying is the training. Over time, you'll notice that not reacting becomes more natural, not because you've become emotionless, but because you've stopped being afraid of emotion. You don't need to suppress what you feel. You simply don't let it carry you away. Equanimity is also built through reflection. Think of the times you suffered not because of what happened, but because of how hard you resisted it. The disappointment that became despair, the uncertainty that became obsession, the sadness that became identity. In each case, it wasn't the feeling that hurt most. it was the reaction. Equanimity is the space between the event and the reaction, and the more you practice sitting in that space, the more peaceful your life becomes. This practice also protects you from burnout. In a world that demands emotional intensity at every turn, equanimity is your anchor. You don't need to match everyone's energy. You don't need to carry what isn't yours. You can show up with presence, not pressure, with clarity, not collapse. This is especially important in relationships. When others are caught in reactivity, your equanimity becomes a gift. It offers calm instead of escalation, space instead of judgment, listening instead of control. You don't have to fix people. You don't have to absorb them. You can simply be with them, fully, without losing yourself. And this isn't a distant kind of presence. It's the most intimate kind, because it doesn't demand. It doesn't push or pull. It holds. And in that holding, healing becomes possible. Equanimity also allows you to trust life, not because everything will go your way, but because you stop needing it to. You stop asking every moment to make you feel better. You start meeting each moment with steadiness, whether it brings comfort or challenge. This steadiness is not stiffness, it's flexibility, like bamboo in the wind, rooted but able to bend. The more you cultivate this quality, the more resilient you become. You don't get stuck in moods. You don't get trapped in loops. You respond wisely, not impulsively. Even your inner dialogue begins to shift. Instead of saying, "I can't handle this," you begin to say, "This too is passing." Instead of saying, "I need this to stop," you say, "Let me meet this with balance." And those words create space. They loosen the emotional grip. They allow you to breathe. In moments of crisis, equanimity won't always feel dramatic. It might feel like a small pause, a deep breath, a quiet sense that you're okay, even when things aren't. That quiet knowing becomes your refuge, your inner fortress, not because it hides you from life, but because it holds you through it. It's important to understand that equanimity is not the absence of emotion. It's emotional maturity. It's what allows you to feel the full range of experience without drowning in it. It's what gives you the strength to let go without resentment, to love without clinging, to grieve without losing your center. This state is not built overnight. It grows slowly, through practice, through repetition, through trial and return. You will fall out of balance. You will react. You will forget. But each time you remember, each time you pause instead of panic, you strengthen your foundation. And eventually, you notice a shift. You don't fear emotions the way you used to. You don't feel threatened by change. You stop needing everything to be perfect in order to feel peace. Because the peace no longer comes from the outside. It comes from your own steady heart. And that heart, quiet, clear, steady, becomes the space from which everything else flows. Compassion becomes more sustainable. Joy becomes less fragile. Sadness becomes less overwhelming. Love becomes freer. Not because life got easier, but because you built a fortress that isn't made of walls. It's made of understanding. This is the quiet power of equanimity. Not loud, not showy, but deep, unshakable, real, and it changes everything. As equanimity becomes stronger, something remarkable begins to surface beneath it. You find that the balance you're building is not only emotional, it's existential. You're not just becoming calmer in the face of feelings. You're starting to question the who behind the emotion itself. Who is the one feeling angry? Who is the one getting hurt? Who exactly is this I that's constantly reacting, defending, chasing, resisting? In Buddhism, this question is not philosophical curiosity. It's the doorway to freedom. And to step through it, you must face one of the deepest illusions the mind ever created, the illusion of a fixed, solid, emotional self. When someone says, "I'm angry," the words feel simple. But look closer. What do they really mean? Is the anger a possession, something the I owns? Is it a permanent part of them? Is it their identity? Or is it just an experience that's arisen, passing through a mind that has temporarily believed it's a person called I? The teaching of anatta, or non-self, reveals that what we usually take as our self is not a single, unchanging thing. It's a flow of perceptions, sensations, thoughts, and feelings, always shifting, always rearranging. Yet we treat this collection as one solid entity. And when that illusion meets strong emotion, the suffering multiplies. Anger isn't just a feeling. It becomes my anger. Sadness isn't just an experience. It becomes my sadness. Pride becomes my success. Shame becomes my flaw. This ownership makes emotions feel heavier, more personal, more permanent. But this heaviness is based on a mistake. It's the mistake of confusing the emotion with the one who experiences it. The mind builds a sense of self using memory, story, and identity. It says, "This is who I am," and collects evidence to prove it. But this constructed self is unstable. It depends on conditions. When those conditions change, the self struggles to keep its shape. Emotions threaten that shape. They challenge the image we hold of ourselves. You believe you're kind, and then anger arises. Suddenly, you feel shame. How could I be angry? That's not me. You believe you're strong, but fear appears. Now you question yourself. Am I weak? This is how the ego turns emotions into identity crises. It tries to own them, control them, and deny the ones that don't match its preferred image. But anatta teaches that there is no owner. There's just experience. Thoughts appear, emotions move, perceptions arise. But nowhere in that process is a fixed self. There's no central I running the show. Just a flow of processes, just like weather patterns passing through the sky. And when you see this clearly, the emotions stop being chains. They become clouds. This doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you stop confusing feelings with identity. When anger comes, you don't say, "I'm angry." You say, "Anger is present." That one shift removes the self from the center of the emotion, and without the self clinging to it, the emotion loses its fuel. This is one of the most powerful insights on the path, because most suffering doesn't come from the feeling itself. It comes from what the ego does with the feeling. It resists it, defends against it, or wraps itself in it. And in doing so, it makes the emotion last longer than it needs to. The illusion of self is subtle. It's not just the belief that I exist. It's the way that belief creeps into everything. Into the need to be right. Into the fear of being misunderstood. Into the pride of achievement. Into the pain of being overlooked. Every time you feel emotionally disturbed, look closely. There's often a me hidden in the middle, demanding something, validation, control, certainty. And every time that me is touched, it reacts, it lashes out, it withdraws, it blames, it protects its image at all costs. This is not awareness reacting. It's identity defending itself. And when identity reacts, suffering always follows. So how do you dissolve it? Start by watching your language, not just spoken, but internal. How often do you say, "Why is this happening to me?" Or, "I can't believe they did that to me." Or, "I'm such a failure." All of these statements rely on the idea that there's a solid I who owns these experiences. But what if there isn't? What if there's just a thought arising in response to conditions? This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you respond without the added weight of identity. When sadness arises, you don't need to question your worth. When someone criticizes you, you don't need to protect your image. When fear appears, you don't need to label yourself as broken. You just meet the moment, without the added me. This practice becomes especially important in conflict. When two egos collide, each defends its version of truth. Each feels attacked. Each wants to be right. But if you can drop the I even briefly, the whole argument shifts. You no longer need to win. You just want to understand. You no longer feel personally insulted. You just see someone else in pain, projecting their own suffering. Without ego, compassion becomes easier. Not because you try harder, but because there's less in the way. The self isn't there to filter, to judge, to compare. You just see clearly. You respond from clarity, not from personal need. This is what freedom feels like. Not cold, not detached, but deeply connected without being personally entangled. You care, but you don't collapse. You feel, but you don't fuse with the feeling. You show up, but you don't make everything about you. And this can extend to joy as well. When good things happen, the ego wants to own them. It says, I did this. It builds identity from success. But this creates tension, because if success becomes me, then failure becomes me too. The ego rides highs and crashes with lows, but when joy arises without ownership, it's light. You're grateful for it, but not attached to it. It comes and goes, like all things. So much of inner peace comes from this simple recognition. Emotions are not personal. They don't say something about who you are. They're passing responses to conditions. They move through you, but they are not you. The more you look for the fixed I, the more you'll find it slipping through your fingers. There is thought, but no thinker. There is emotion, but no permanent feeler. There is reaction, but no fixed self behind the reaction. There's only experience, constantly changing. When this becomes clear, the grip of emotion loosens. You no longer feel like a person trapped in sadness. You feel like awareness witnessing sadness arise and fall. You no longer feel consumed by anger. You feel the movement of heat, the surge of energy, and you let it pass. You stop adding stories. You stop adding identity. You just allow the wave to rise and fade. This is not suppression. This is wisdom. The wisdom that knows experience is just that. Experience. Not a self. Not a sentence. Not a truth you have to carry forever. And yes, it takes time. This is not a trick or a shortcut. It's a practice, a way of living, a way of meeting each moment with curiosity, not clinging, with attention, not identity. The emotional ego is a habit, built over years of believing that every feeling is a reflection of who you are. But the truth is simpler. Every feeling is a reflection of what has happened. And what has happened is always changing. You are not your mood. You are not your history. You are not your reputation, your trauma, your fear, or your pride. You are the one seeing it all. And that seeing is not a self. It's an opening into freedom, an opening into peace. When the illusion of a permanent self begins to dissolve, something subtle but powerful emerges. Space. Not emptiness in the hollow sense, but spaciousness in your awareness. You're no longer trapped inside every emotion. You're no longer the character in every mental story. You're watching now. There is distance, not detachment. Clarity, not coldness. And from that clarity comes the next deep unfolding on this path, the mirror mind. The mirror mind is not about controlling emotions. It's about reflecting them without distortion. It sees clearly, without judgment, without craving, without resistance. It doesn't argue with what arises. It doesn't cling to pleasure or fight against pain. It simply observes, silently and steadily, like a mirror reflecting whatever appears. This capacity is cultivated through the practice of vipassana, insight meditation. While many forms of meditation aim to calm or concentrate the mind, vipassana is different. Its goal is understanding. It's not about escaping your thoughts or numbing your feelings. It's about turning toward them with honest observation, watching without reaction, seeing without labeling. At first, this seems difficult. The mind is used to evaluating everything. It classifies each emotion, good or bad, wanted or unwanted, success or failure. That's how suffering begins. The judgment becomes heavier than the emotion itself. Sadness is not just sadness, it becomes weakness. Anger is not just anger, it becomes shame. Even happiness becomes a trap when you're afraid it will disappear. The mirror mind drops all of that. It doesn't say, "This shouldn't be here." It doesn't say, "I need more of this." It simply reflects. And that reflection is powerful because it interrupts the cycle of unconscious reaction. In that stillness, the emotion is allowed to unfold on its own without being fed by thought. This practice begins with mindfulness. You sit, you breathe, and instead of trying to control what happens inside, you become a witness to it. Thoughts appear, you note them. Sensations arise, you feel them. Emotions surface, you observe. You don't chase anything, you don't suppress anything, you just watch, moment by moment. The key is to see the difference between observation and evaluation. Observation says, "This is here." Evaluation says, "This is good," or "This is bad." The mirror mind stays with observation. It doesn't get involved in the narrative. It doesn't attach meaning. And that's what gives it power. Because most suffering is not caused by what we feel. It's caused by what we think about what we feel. Overthinking, for example, thrives on judgment. You feel anxiety and start analyzing it. Why am I anxious? What's wrong with me? Will this feeling ever go away? Each question tightens the grip. But when you observe anxiety without any of those thoughts, it's just energy, a tightness in the chest, a buzzing in the mind, a restlessness in the limbs. Seen clearly, it's not unbearable. It's just something happening. The more you practice this, the more you begin to trust that emotions don't need to be fixed. They just need to be seen, without interference, without resistance, because every emotion, left alone, knows how to leave. This is especially important for those caught in chronic emotional patterns, those who live with cycles of overthinking, self-doubt, or emotional exhaustion. The mirror mind is not a quick fix, but it is the long-term healing. It breaks the pattern not by suppressing it, but by no longer reacting to it. When the mind sees clearly, the cycle loses energy, reaction fades, awareness remains. It helps to remember that the mirror does not select what it reflects. It doesn't prefer one image over another. It doesn't chase beauty or avoid discomfort. It's passive in function, but profound in impact. And your awareness can function the same way. When a painful memory arises, reflect it. When a joyful feeling comes, reflect it. Don't hold it. Don't push it. Just let it appear and disappear in its own time. Through this reflection, you begin to see the layers of experience. You notice that emotions often arise before thoughts. You catch the tiny shifts in the body before the mind explains them. You see how one sensation becomes a label, which becomes a thought, which becomes a story, which becomes suffering. And in that seeing, you break the chain. This kind of attention is not passive, it's deeply engaged. But it's not grasping. It's not trying to control outcomes. It's fully alive in the present. And this presence reveals something surprising. Most of what passes through the mind has no substance. It rises, looks real, and fades, like reflections on water, like dreams after waking. With the mirror mind, even intense emotions become manageable. Fear becomes a sensation you can sit with. Grief becomes a wave you can observe. Excitement becomes energy that passes through without needing to be clung to. Nothing has to be avoided. Nothing has to be indulged. Everything is held in awareness and allowed to move. This doesn't make you passive in life. It makes you precise. You stop reacting from confusion and start responding from clarity. You speak from awareness, not defensiveness. You move from balance, not urgency. You become less pulled by what others say or do because you're no longer trapped in your own inner commentary. Over time, the mirror mind becomes your default, not just during meditation, but in daily life. You walk with more attention. You listen with more presence. You feel without losing yourself. The world doesn't stop being chaotic, but your relationship to it changes. You stop expecting the world to be quiet, and instead you become the quiet inside the world. This inner quiet doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't carry what isn't yours. It means you stop identifying with every emotional wave that moves through you. You hold space for them, but you're not owned by them. Even in conflict, the mirror mind brings clarity. Someone speaks with anger, and instead of matching their energy, you observe it. You feel your own reaction rising, but you reflect it rather than acting on it. That moment of awareness creates choice. You don't escalate. You don't shrink. You stay grounded. You respond with intention. This capacity also transforms your inner voice. You start noticing how often the mind criticizes, judges, or attacks. And instead of believing those thoughts, you reflect them. You see them for what they are, just thoughts, not facts, not you, just passing clouds in a wide sky. This takes the pressure off perfection. You no longer need to be free of emotion to feel peaceful. You just need to see clearly, to witness without clinging, to sit with what arises and know that you are the space, not the storm. Vipassana teaches this slowly. It's not a technique you master overnight. It's a relationship you build with your own mind. You sit again and again through discomfort and distraction. You watch the patterns return and you watch them fade. You stay steady. You keep reflecting. And then, gradually, you see the mind softening. The reactions slow. The judgments lose their sharpness. There's less to fix, less to explain, more to simply be with. This is the deep healing that the mirror mind offers. Not escape, not denial, but the kind of presence that heals without force. It's the opposite of emotional suppression. It's emotional allowance, with wisdom. As the mirror mind grows, anxiety begins to dissolve at the root. Because anxiety feeds on resistance, it lives in the gap between what is and what the mind thinks should be. When you reflect what is, without adding should, there's less tension, less fear, less urgency to make every emotion go away. You start to trust yourself, not because you control everything, but because you've stopped being controlled by every passing feeling. You become reliable, for yourself, for others. You become the mirror that reflects the chaos without becoming it. And that changes your life, because now you're no longer living in reaction. You're living in response. And that response is rooted in stillness, not struggle. This is what it means to observe emotions without judgment, to turn the mind from a battleground into a mirror. to stop needing every feeling to behave, and instead to let each one arise, stay for a while, and fade without leaving a scar. From this place, peace becomes natural, not because nothing disturbs you, but because you stop disturbing yourself. And in that stillness, something beautiful is revealed. Every emotion is just a movement. Every thought is just a moment. But you, the awareness that sees, are steady, spacious, and free. The more time you spend reflecting emotions without judgment, the more you begin to see the patterns underneath them. You start to notice which feelings visit you often, which thoughts pull you in, and which reactions rise automatically before you even think. These aren't coincidences. They're not random. They've been built, moment by moment, response by response, through something far older than you might expect. These patterns have a name: karma. Karma is not punishment. It's not fate chasing you down for past mistakes. It's much more immediate and much more personal. Karma is the momentum of habit. It's how your choices, reactions, and intentions create grooves in your mind. Those grooves shape the way you respond to the world, and over time they become so familiar you forget they're not permanent. You think, this is just how I am, but it isn't. It's how you've been trained, by life, by conditioning, by repetition. Your emotional habits are karmic. The way you tighten when criticized, the way you avoid confrontation, the way you search for approval, all of that has been learned, practiced, reinforced. Every time you repeat a response, it gets a little deeper, like water carving stone, not out of malice, but out of momentum. The good news is that karma isn't fixed. It's fluid. It can be redirected. You're not locked into old grooves forever. You can see them. You can understand how they were formed. And most importantly, you can plant new ones. Karma is both the echo of the past and the soil of the future. To begin this work, you have to first slow down enough to notice what's automatic. Noticing is everything. When you react quickly, it's hard to see the pattern. But when you pause, even briefly, you give yourself a window to observe what's driving you. Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's an old belief. Maybe it's a survival mechanism that once helped you and now only limits you. Once you begin to see the same reactions happening in the same situations, you're seeing karma in motion. For example, if you always feel rejected when someone disagrees with you, that's a karmic groove. Somewhere in your past, disagreement was paired with pain, and that association has stayed. Now your mind treats every differing opinion as a personal wound. But that connection isn't natural. It was built, and anything built can be rebuilt. The process begins with curiosity, not blame. Don't judge yourself for your patterns. That just deepens them. Instead, become interested. Ask, where did this come from? What does it want to protect? What belief is underneath it? You'll often find that what looks like stubbornness or overreaction is really just a memory trying to protect you from something you once didn't understand. This kind of attention is already healing, because karma survives in the dark. It thrives on unconsciousness. When you shine awareness on a pattern, you stop feeding it automatically. It doesn't disappear immediately, but it begins to loosen. And that space is where new karma is planted. Planting new karma means forming new emotional habits, consciously, consistently, and with compassion. It starts small. If your usual reaction is irritation, try pausing before you speak. That pause is a new groove. If you normally withdraw in discomfort, try staying present for one more breath. That moment is a karmic shift. If you tend to blame yourself when things go wrong, try replacing that thought with kindness. even silently, even if you don't fully believe it yet. That effort leaves a mark. New grooves don't feel natural at first. They take effort. Your mind will want to return to the familiar, but each time you choose presence over panic, patience over reactivity, compassion over judgment, you're changing your inner landscape, not by force, but by repetition. Buddhism teaches that karma is formed by intention. What you intend, what you aim for, shapes the energy of your action. Two people can do the same thing on the outside, but the intention behind it creates different karmic seeds. So when working with emotional habits, your intention matters more than perfection. You don't need to respond flawlessly. You need to respond with awareness, with sincerity. Even if you still feel fear, choosing to meet it with curiosity instead of avoidance plants a new seed. Even if your anger still rises, choosing not to act on it plants another. Even when old habits return, each conscious breath within them is a small transformation. This is not abstract theory. This is real, lived training. Each moment of awareness adds a new thread to your mental fabric. Over time, those threads weave into a different identity, not because you tried to become someone else, but because you stopped feeding the version of yourself built from pain. Karma also includes how you treat others emotionally. If your tendency is to meet criticism with defensiveness, practice listening with space. If your habit is to control when you're anxious, practice releasing outcomes. If you often react with silence when hurt, try expressing yourself with clarity. Each new response builds a future where your mind isn't repeating the same suffering. This includes how you speak to yourself. Many emotional grooves come from self-talk. The inner critic, the anxious forecaster, the voice that tells you you're behind or not enough. All of these are karmic echoes. You didn't choose them once, but you choose them now by letting them run. That's not blame. It's power, because it means you can start choosing differently. One of the simplest but most transformative ways to shift karma is through metta, loving kindness. When you consistently offer gentle phrases of goodwill, even silently, to yourself and others, you interrupt harshness. You create a new emotional tone in the mind. Not every voice has to be critical. Not every memory has to be heavy. You can build emotional habits rooted in care. These shifts are not loud. They're quiet, but they're lasting. They don't require dramatic life changes. They require one thing: consistency. Karma isn't changed in a single breakthrough. It's changed in 100 quiet moments when you choose differently, when you pause, when you reflect, when you forgive, when you let go. And forgiveness itself is a deep karmic reset. Not because it erases the past, but because it ends your participation in the cycle. When you forgive, you stop adding fuel to an old fire. You stop rehearsing the pain. You release the identity built on being wronged. That release is not weakness, it's freedom. And freedom creates new energy, the space where something different can grow. Karma also moves through generations. Emotional habits are often passed down. The way your parents responded to fear, to anger, to shame, it lives in you not because of destiny, but because of exposure. And you have the chance to change the lineage, to respond differently, to become a new reference point for those around you. You do this not by teaching others how to be, but by embodying the difference. Your calm teaches without words. Your patience breaks patterns in real time. Your kindness, especially when it's hardest to give, becomes the seed of someone else's healing. Karma is not locked in. It's alive. Every moment is a meeting place between the past and the future. What you choose now reshapes what comes next. You are not your patterns. You are the one who can watch them, question them, and shift them. Even the most deeply ingrained emotional reflexes can be softened. Even the oldest pain can be met with something new. This is the real power of working with karma, not in trying to undo the past, but in choosing the present so clearly that the future takes care of itself. When this becomes your way of living, you stop feeling trapped. You stop waiting for your emotions to fix themselves. You begin to see that your reactions are not evidence of failure. They are invitations to understand, to evolve, to lay down new tracks. And the more you respond with this awareness, the more natural it becomes. One day, you'll face a situation that used to knock you down, and you'll respond with balance. Not because you tried harder, but because you've practiced, because you've changed what grows in your mind. That's how karma works, quietly, continuously, through your attention, your choice, your intention. And with each breath, you're planting. With each pause, you're reshaping. With each act of clarity, you're becoming free. As you begin to shift your emotional patterns through awareness and intention, karma becomes something you're no longer bound to, but something you actively shape. You're not repeating reactions, you're planting new ones. Still, there's a deeper layer of emotional turbulence that doesn't come from personal experience alone. It's woven into the very structure of the human mind. Beneath habits, beneath conditioning, there are three forces at work. Three poisons that quietly fuel almost every form of emotional chaos: greed, hatred, and delusion. These are not just extreme behaviors, they're energies, subtle movements in the mind, and they don't need to be loud to cause suffering. They're often quiet, disguised, normalized. You may not even notice they're present, but they're behind many of the emotions you struggle with. They distort perception, drive impulsive reactions, and keep you locked in cycles of craving, rejection, and confusion. Greed, or craving, is not just about wanting things. It's the feeling of lack. It's the sense that this moment is not enough. It tells you that happiness is always just one more step away. If you could just get that approval, that security, that outcome. It whispers that peace is waiting in the next version of life, never in the one you're living now. And because of this, greed pulls you out of the present. It keeps your attention on what's missing, even when so much is already here. Emotionally, greed shows up as restlessness. It makes you chase highs, cling to comfort, and fear the end of pleasure. It tells you that joy must be held on to tightly, and that discomfort must be avoided at all costs. In this way, greed creates anxiety. You're always trying to keep what can't be kept and avoid what can't be escaped. The deeper root is the mistaken belief that fulfillment comes from getting what you want, rather than understanding what you're chasing. The antidote to greed is generosity, not just in the material sense, but generosity of spirit. It's the choice to let go, to give, to share, even when the mind says you don't have enough. When you give freely, your time, your attention, your care, you're training the mind to release the grip of craving. You're proving to yourself that peace doesn't come from more, it comes from enough. Generosity opens the heart. It softens the desperate edge of desire. It replaces scarcity with connection. Hatred, the second poison, is more obvious, but no less sneaky. It arises not only as rage or aggression, but also as aversion, judgment, impatience. It's the mind's reflex to push things away. When something feels threatening, an emotion, a person, a truth, hatred says, "This must go." It divides the world into good and bad, right and wrong, safe and unsafe. And once that division is made, it creates conflict inside and out. Hatred fuels emotional pain because it resists reality. It says, "This shouldn't be here," and tries to fight what is. Whether it's grief, shame, fear, or failure, hatred adds a layer of rejection. You don't just feel the pain, you feel the pain of hating that you feel the pain. That second layer is often heavier than the first. The emotional signature of hatred is tension. It tightens the body, sharpens the thoughts, and narrows your view. You become reactive, defensive, closed. You lose the ability to see nuance. You stop hearing. You prepare for battle, even when no one is fighting you. The mind, driven by hatred, sees enemies where there are none and fuels stories that create distance and harm. The antidote to hatred is patience. Not passive tolerance, but active spaciousness. Patience doesn't mean you approve of everything. It means you create room for everything to be seen clearly. When you meet anger with patience, you're refusing to react from blindness. You're giving the heat time to cool before you act. Patience doesn't suppress your response. It refines it. It gives wisdom a chance to speak before the emotion does. Practicing patience softens the sharp edges of hatred. It allows you to sit with discomfort without adding fire. It teaches you to delay the need to fix, to control, or to punish. And in that delay, clarity arrives. Often, the thing that looked like a threat is just a moment asking for presence. Hatred says, "This must end." Patience says, "Let's look again." Delusion, the third poison, is the most subtle and the most dangerous. It's the root of the other two. Delusion means not seeing clearly. It's not just ignorance of facts. It's confusion about the nature of reality. It's the belief that the self is fixed, that emotions are permanent, that thoughts are facts. Delusion makes you mistake the temporary for the lasting and the story for the truth. Emotionally, delusion shows up as overthinking, confusion, indecision. You lose touch with what's real because the mind is busy reacting to projections, assumptions, and fears. You create entire emotional reactions to things that haven't happened or aren't happening. Delusion builds false identities. It convinces you that your worth is tied to achievements, that your pain is proof of failure, that your feelings are who you are. This poison disconnects you from presence. It's why you miss the simplicity of what's actually here, because you're tangled in layers of thought about what could be or what should have been. You stop seeing people as they are. You see them through filters of memory, expectation, and fear. Delusion is the fog that keeps you from understanding your own mind. The antidote to delusion is wisdom, not intellectual knowledge, but direct seeing. Wisdom grows when you observe without distortion, when you recognize patterns, when you question your assumptions. It's what happens when awareness is applied consistently, gently, and honestly. It's cultivated through meditation, through reflection, through compassionate inquiry. Wisdom doesn't come from answers, it comes from clarity. It shows you what is instead of what you fear or want. It helps you notice, this feeling is here, but it's not forever. This thought is loud, but it's not true. This person is struggling, not attacking. Wisdom reveals the structure of experience, the cause and effect of emotional habits. And when you see clearly, your actions begin to change naturally. These three poisons are often layered. Greed can turn into hatred when you don't get what you crave. Hatred can deepen delusion when it blinds you to reality. Delusion fuels both by making you think you are your desires and fears. But the good news is that when you work with one, you often weaken the others. Generosity creates openness, which reduces hatred. Patience brings clarity, which reduces delusion. Wisdom cuts through all three, and none of these antidotes are reserved for saints or monks. They're everyday practices. Generosity might mean offering a kind word when you want to withdraw. Patience might mean breathing before you respond. Wisdom might mean questioning a thought instead of believing it immediately. These are small shifts, but they change everything. You begin to live with less urgency, less emotional pulling and pushing, less collapsing into old patterns, because you're no longer acting from poison, you're acting from presence. And this presence is not passive, it's powerful. It gives you freedom from compulsive reactions. It gives you space to choose your response. It allows you to show up with depth instead of defensiveness. These are not abstract ideals, they are practical tools. When you feel restlessness rise, respond with giving. When you feel irritation flare, respond with stillness. When confusion clouds your thoughts, respond with curiosity. Over time, the poisons lose their grip. They may still arise, but you don't follow them. You recognize them for what they are, habits of the mind, not truths of the self. You don't need to fight them. You just need to stop feeding them. And that's what transformation looks like. Not perfection, not a mind free of emotion, but a life guided by clarity rather than craving, by care rather than control, by awareness rather than assumption. This is what it means to purify your emotional life, not by suppressing feelings, but by working with their roots, not by pretending to be peaceful, but by understanding what disturbs the peace. And as you do, you build a different kind of inner world, one where generosity replaces greed, where patience quiets hatred, where wisdom dissolves delusion. Not because life becomes easier, but because your mind becomes lighter. That's the freedom the Buddha pointed to, not in changing what comes, but in changing how you meet it. With presence, with compassion, with the clear strength of a mind no longer ruled by poisons. Once you begin to recognize the three poisons as the roots of your emotional suffering, something unexpected happens. You stop trying to manipulate your feelings and start observing their causes. You stop seeing your reactions as personal flaws and start understanding them as conditioned responses. With generosity, patience, and wisdom, the mind becomes less chaotic. But even as clarity grows, there's one attachment that quietly lingers beneath the surface of all others, the attachment to permanence. This illusion holds everything else in place, and nothing shatters that illusion more directly than meditating on death. This is not a practice of morbidity. It's not about fear, darkness, or obsession with endings. It's about honesty. It's about waking up from the trance that convinces you there's always more time, that you'll always have tomorrow to change, to forgive, to let go. Maranasati, the Buddhist practice of death contemplation, pulls that illusion away gently but firmly, not to depress you, but to free you from the mental grip of delay and denial. When you live as if life will continue forever, your emotions often feel heavier. Moods seem like solid truths. Worries seem worth clinging to. Grudges seem justified. There's a false sense of abundance in time that makes you treat your inner life carelessly. But when you bring death close, not as a threat, but as a teacher, everything sharpens. Awareness deepens. You stop wasting energy on what doesn't matter, and you start noticing what does. Contemplating death changes the texture of experience. The same thoughts arise, but they don't hook you in the same way. You might still feel irritation, but now you know it won't last, and neither will you. That awareness softens the edges. You don't have to indulge the emotion because you understand its size compared to the truth of impermanence. This isn't about becoming detached or indifferent. It's about becoming fully present. When you know something is temporary, you give it your full attention. You treat the moment with care. You speak more kindly. You listen more deeply. You let go more easily. That's what Maranasati does. It grounds you in reality, not to scare you, but to bring your values forward. When you sit with the contemplation of death, you're not thinking about how or when you'll die. You're reflecting on the certainty of it. And that certainty strips away the stories you tell yourself about what matters. It reveals how much emotional energy is spent defending identities, controlling outcomes, fearing judgment, all of which dissolve in the face of impermanence. This isn't abstract philosophy. It's practical awareness. When you remember that your own life will end, it becomes easier to let go of the anger you've been carrying. When you remember that others will die too, your impatience begins to fade. The person who annoyed you this morning could be gone tomorrow. The opportunity you're avoiding might never come again. Contemplating death forces you to live, not with fear, but with clarity. And this clarity simplifies emotion. You start asking better questions. Is this worth my energy? Is this reaction helping anyone? Is this thought aligned with what truly matters to me? These aren't questions of morality, they're questions of freedom. When you live with death in your awareness, you start to choose more wisely, not out of pressure, but out of perspective. One of the most beautiful outcomes of Maranasati is the ability to feel deeply without clinging. Because you know nothing lasts, you allow feelings to move through you. You don't need them to stay. You don't need to define yourself by them. Joy is welcomed, but not gripped. Sadness is honored, but not resisted. There's space for everything because nothing is permanent. That space is emotional clarity. This practice also shifts how you deal with fear. Most fear is rooted in the unknown. But death, the ultimate unknown, becomes less terrifying when you face it directly. The more you reflect on your own mortality, the more you realize that you're not avoiding death. You're avoiding the feeling of uncertainty. And once you're willing to be present with that, fear begins to lose its control. You also begin to see how many decisions are made to protect the ego from change. But death reveals that change is inevitable. It removes the illusion that you can freeze your life in place. That understanding liberates you from the pressure to make everything secure. Instead, you learn to ride the wave of change with grace. Contemplating death also builds compassion. When you accept your own impermanence, you understand everyone else's more deeply. You stop seeing people as obstacles or tools. You see them as fellow travelers, fragile, temporary, like you. This softens the tendency to judge or dismiss. It opens the heart to connection, even in conflict. This doesn't mean you become sentimental or overly emotional. It means you stop pretending that time is unlimited. That shift brings urgency to love, to presence, to forgiveness. You don't put off what matters. You don't waste time defending your pride. You live with fewer regrets because you're not waiting for the perfect moment to be honest, kind, or brave. There's also a surprising lightness in this practice. When you let go of the need for things to last, you stop carrying so much. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to hold on to old pain. You don't need to finish every task or prove every point. You begin to rest in the truth that nothing is complete, and that's okay. You begin to trust impermanence, not as a threat, but as the rhythm of life. Seasons change, moods shift, relationships evolve, bodies age, everything moves. Trying to make it stop only creates suffering. Accepting the flow creates peace. Maranasati teaches you to meet each moment with fresh eyes, to greet the day not as another repetition, but as something that will never come again. You eat more slowly. You speak with more care. You listen not to respond, but to understand. These are not dramatic gestures. They're quiet acknowledgements of what's real. This practice also changes your relationship with your own mind. You start to see thoughts as temporary events, not permanent truths. Even your most painful thoughts lose some of their weight when you remember you won't be thinking them forever. The mental noise becomes less threatening. You stop needing to control it all. The practice doesn't ask you to dwell in fear. It invites you to live more fully. You don't need to rehearse your death. You need to remember that life is short enough to make every breath matter. That awareness changes how you work, how you rest, how you love. It brings everything into focus. Maranasati is not a dark cloud. It's a clean sky. It clears out the fog of distraction and brings you back to what matters. It helps you hold grief without drowning, hold joy without gripping, hold failure without collapse. You become emotionally clear not by avoiding life, but by meeting it honestly. And this clarity becomes contagious. Others feel it in you. They sense your presence, your steadiness, your groundedness. You're no longer shaken by every change or consumed by every thought. You bring perspective to chaos, softness to tension, humility to success. You're not pretending that life is endless. You're living with the freedom of someone who knows it's not. This awareness doesn't remove emotion. It transforms it, from noise into music, from chaos into depth. You stop trying to escape what's difficult and begin to embrace what's real. That embrace brings strength, not the strength of control, but the strength of surrender. You surrender to change, to time, to the nature of things. And in that surrender, you find emotional freedom, not because you've detached, but because you've awakened. And this awakening is not distant. It's not for another life. It's here, in this breath, in this moment, in this precious awareness of how short and beautiful this life really is. That's the strange gift of meditating on death. Not more fear, more life. Not more sorrow, more clarity. Not an ending, a beginning. When death is accepted as part of life, not as a shadow, but as a truth, something softens inside. The grip loosens, the pressure fades. You begin to move through the world with more presence and less need to control outcomes. You start listening more, rushing less. And in that slow, honest space, one of the most overlooked forms of healing begins to reveal itself, not through more thinking or more speaking, but through silence. This is not the silence of discomfort or awkwardness. It's not what happens when we run out of things to say. It's not an emptiness to be filled. Noble silence, as understood in Buddhist practice, is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of awareness. It is the stillness where emotions are no longer forced into shape, but allowed to unfold, release, and settle on their own. In daily life, emotions are constantly being pushed and pulled by words. We try to explain them, defend them, escape them, or wrap them in stories so we don't have to feel them directly. But in noble silence, there is no storytelling, no performance, no attempt to be understood or agreed with. And in that wordless space, the mind and heart begin to return to their natural state. This return is not immediate. At first, silence can feel unsettling. The noise in your head becomes louder without the distraction of speech. You hear thoughts that have been hiding under your busyness. You notice discomfort you were keeping at a distance with conversation. But this is exactly why silence is healing. It reveals what's actually there. Most emotional exhaustion comes not just from what we feel, but from how we constantly manage, narrate, and resist those feelings. Talking can be a beautiful connection, but it can also become a form of avoidance. Noble silence removes the layer of noise that normally covers the emotional body, and when that covering drops, feelings can breathe. The silence becomes a mirror. Not a mirror that judges or distorts, but one that simply reflects. You start seeing your habits of reaction, the urgency to fill space, the need to be seen or to explain yourself. In this seeing, there is space to relax. Not every feeling needs a response. Not every mood needs to be labeled. Some emotions dissolve simply because you've stopped interrupting their natural course. In noble silence, emotions aren't denied. They are allowed. Allowed without being manipulated. Allowed without being dramatized. This is where true digestion happens. Not mental digestion, where we analyze or fix things, but emotional digestion, where feelings are processed naturally by awareness alone. Just as the body knows how to heal a wound without instruction, the heart knows how to integrate emotion when given space. But we rarely offer that space. We rush, we speak, we fill. Silence offers a pause from that habit. It gives your inner life time to catch up with you. This doesn't mean you retreat from the world forever. Noble silence isn't escapism, it's preparation. It's where you regain balance before you re-enter interaction. It's how you learn to respond instead of react. Because when you become familiar with stillness, you no longer fear your feelings. You trust your capacity to hold them without needing to fix or explain them. This trust becomes your anchor. In silence, you start to witness how much energy you've been spending trying to make others understand you. You see how often you speak to fill emotional discomfort rather than to share truth. You notice the subtle pressure to say the right thing, to be heard, to get approval, and when that pressure fades, a deeper kind of presence takes its place. Presence without performance, listening without planning, feeling without judgment. Silence trains the nervous system to stop chasing resolution. You stop needing every conversation to end in clarity. You stop needing every emotion to make sense. You learn to sit with contradiction, with mystery, with moments that have no answer yet. And in that sitting, peace arises, not because the problem is solved, but because you're no longer feeding the conflict. This peace doesn't come from escaping life. It comes from being with life in a more honest way. You stop treating your inner world like a project to be completed and start relating to it like a garden that grows when it's given care. Silence is that care. It's the sun, the soil, the space that allows healing to occur on its own. In this quiet, even your relationship to speech changes. You start speaking less from impulse and more from clarity. Words become intentional, not automatic. You no longer speak just to be right or to be noticed. You speak to connect, to share, to offer something that matters. Silence teaches you the value of words, not just in what you say, but in what you choose not to say. It also deepens your relationship with others. When two people can share space without needing to fill it, a different kind of intimacy appears. It's not based on mutual entertainment or constant agreement. It's based on presence. You're no longer trying to impress each other. You're simply there, together, each witnessing your own experience and respecting the others. Noble silence also reveals that some emotions only exist because we keep feeding them with language. Resentment, for example, often survives through rehearsal, repeating the same story, re-energizing the same wound. But in silence, that story doesn't get told. The wound sits quietly. It feels heavy at first, but without constant retelling, it begins to soften. Not because it's forgotten, but because it's no longer being exaggerated by speech. This doesn't mean silence erases pain. It means silence allows pain to rest, and rest is the beginning of healing. Even joy deepens in silence, because when you're not rushing to share or capture it, you can fully feel it. The moment becomes enough. You're not leaning toward the next thing. You're inside the experience, without commentary. That direct experience is what makes life vivid. You stop watching your life like a narrator. You live it as presence. Silence also reduces emotional reactivity. You become less likely to say something you'll regret, less likely to lash out, more likely to pause, to wait, to understand what's really happening beneath the surface. Because now you're used to listening, not just to others, but to yourself. You know the difference between a thought that needs to be voiced and one that just needs to pass. This inner listening strengthens your emotional clarity. When something hurts, you can sit with it before assigning blame. When you feel overwhelmed, you can breathe before reacting. When you're confused, you can wait without rushing for an answer. This patience becomes a form of wisdom, and that wisdom begins to show you which emotions are real and which are reactions to noise. You realize that much of what you once thought were feelings were actually responses to stimulation, news, arguments, notifications, opinions. In silence, all of that falls away. What's left is what's actually yours, and often what's yours is simpler, quieter, more tender. Silence gives birth to self-honesty, not through analysis, but through space. You begin to see yourself more clearly, not as an identity to protect, but as a field of changing experience. Thoughts come and go, feelings rise and pass, and underneath all of it is awareness, steady, unshaken, at peace. This peace isn't dramatic, it's quiet. It doesn't shout, it doesn't need to be declared, it simply holds everything. In silence, you realize you don't need to fight your emotions. You don't need to explain them. You just need to let them be seen fully without interference. And when that happens, the system recalibrates. You become more balanced, not because you forced yourself to be calm, but because you gave your inner world a break from noise. You stopped interrupting your own healing. You trusted stillness, and that trust changed you. Noble silence is not something reserved for retreats or temples. It's available every day, in the pause before you speak, in the breath before you reply, in the decision to be present instead of performative. It's there in your morning coffee, your evening walk, your silent observation of a sunset. These moments are not empty. They're full of clarity. They're where your emotions get space to land, to move, to settle. And over time, silence becomes a friend, a guide, a home you return to when the world becomes too loud, not to escape it, but to meet it from a place of grounded presence. This is the quiet power of noble silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of understanding, not the suppression of emotion, but the space where emotion can breathe and be free. As noble silence begins to take root, you discover how much internal space is freed when you're no longer tangled in reaction. You no longer feel pulled to answer every emotion or defend every thought. And with this stillness comes a question you may not have expected. What are you actually holding on to? What continues to weigh down your heart when you've already slowed down, quieted your mind, and stopped feeding unnecessary noise? Often, what remains is the subtle, ongoing pressure of choice. Not freedom of choice, but the heavy, anxious attachment to outcomes. And that's where the practice of renunciation begins. Renunciation isn't about having less. It's not about poverty or moral superiority. In Buddhism, renunciation is about lightness, It's about no longer being emotionally tangled in 1,000 possibilities, in imagined futures, in the burden of keeping every door open. It's choosing peace over possession, simplicity over excess, clarity over constant evaluation. The modern world equates freedom with more options. But emotionally, the more options you cling to, the more scattered your energy becomes. Every decision becomes a mental battlefield. What if you choose the wrong job? What if the relationship doesn't work out? What if you miss something better? The fear of choosing wrong becomes more painful than any real mistake. And even after making a decision, the mind stays restless, wondering what might have happened if you had chosen differently. This is decisional anxiety, and it doesn't come from choices themselves. It comes from attachment to what those choices mean about you. You don't just want to make a decision, you want to guarantee a result. You want control, you want certainty, and when that certainty is impossible, the emotional weight grows heavier. Renunciation offers relief, not by taking away your power to choose, but by removing your need to cling. It shifts your relationship to outcomes. You can still act, still decide, still move forward, but without tying your peace to a specific result. You choose from clarity, not craving. You act from purpose, not panic. This practice starts with seeing where your tension lies. Which choices feel heavy? Which outcomes feel non-negotiable? Where do you feel stuck between options, not because you don't know what you want, but because you're afraid to lose? That fear of missing out, of failing, of regretting, is often what creates emotional exhaustion. You carry every future in your mind, every path you didn't take, and you wonder endlessly if you chose well. Renunciation dissolves that tension by showing you that peace isn't found in choosing perfectly. It's found in letting go of the fantasy that one choice will complete you. No option can give you lasting happiness. No outcome can save you from change. What you let go of is not joy or progress. It's the illusion that fulfillment lies in controlling the path ahead. You begin to see that some decisions don't need more thinking. They need release. Not everything deserves equal space in your mind. Not every door needs to stay open. You simplify, not by becoming careless, but by becoming intentional. You release the need to do everything, to be everything, to have everything figured out. And in that release, emotional clarity arrives. This shift is especially important when dealing with goals and ambition. Desire by itself is not the problem, but when it turns into fixation, the mind becomes rigid. You stop enjoying the process because your happiness is tied to achievement. You feel pressure in every step because you fear what will happen if you don't get what you want. Renunciation unhooks your identity from the outcome. You can still aim, still strive, still improve, but your self-worth is no longer on the line. You don't collapse when things go differently than planned. You don't confuse setbacks with failure, because you're no longer living in a world of emotional contracts where every result determines your value. This doesn't mean you give up on progress. It means you give up on being emotionally enslaved by it. You keep working, but you work in peace. You keep loving, but you love without needing to possess. You keep choosing, but you choose with trust instead of tension. Renunciation also removes the hidden guilt that comes from always wanting more. When you live in constant desire, you rarely feel satisfied. Even after getting what you want, your mind immediately jumps to what's next. This leaves a trail of unfinished emotions, gratitude that never matures, joy that never settles, rest that never arrives. You're always reaching, never resting. But when you renounce the need to constantly have more, you rediscover contentment. Not the fake kind, where you pretend to be satisfied, but the deep kind, where your mind relaxes because it's no longer chasing. You appreciate without comparing. You enjoy without fearing loss. You stay present because you're not trading now for later. This kind of emotional clarity also affects your relationships. When you're attached to how others behave or respond, your peace depends on them. Every disagreement feels threatening. Every distance feels personal. You hold back out of fear. You push forward out of need, and the relationship becomes a negotiation for emotional survival. But with renunciation, love becomes lighter. You stop trying to manage someone else's experience. You give without agenda. You listen without needing agreement. You care without needing to control. This isn't detachment, it's honest connection. You're no longer demanding certainty from others. You're showing up fully without the emotional pressure to shape every outcome. Renunciation also heals indecision. When you're stuck between two paths, it's usually not because both are bad. It's because you're afraid of what you'll lose. The fear of missing out paralyzes the mind. But what if you released the need to keep all options open? What if you trusted that letting go of one thing allows space for something else? That's the wisdom of renunciation. It doesn't reduce your freedom, it reveals it. You're not free when you have every option. You're free when you're no longer afraid to choose. When you trust that peace doesn't live in the next option, but in how lightly you walk the one you're on. This practice is supported by mindfulness. When you're aware of the emotional noise around your choices, you start to see which attachments are causing suffering. You learn to pause before chasing the next thing. You learn to ask, is this craving or clarity? Is this fear or freedom? Am I choosing from peace or from pressure? These questions don't give you instant answers, but they give you insight, and insight brings stillness. Renunciation also teaches you how to stop arguing with reality. So much of emotional stress comes from fighting what is. You resist the situation. You protest the timing. You replay what could have been. But none of that changes anything. It only keeps you emotionally stuck. When you renounce resistance, you accept life on its own terms. That doesn't mean you give up. It means you stop wasting energy on battles you can't win. You save your strength for the things you can change. You stop leaking peace through constant emotional friction, and that peace becomes your guide. You make decisions not from desperation, but from steadiness. You let go not from weakness, but from wisdom. You simplify not because you're incapable, but because you're done pretending complexity makes you more valuable. This practice isn't easy at first. The mind wants to hold on, it wants to know, it wants guarantees. But over time, you learn to meet that discomfort with calm. You learn that most of the pain in letting go doesn't come from the loss. It comes from the fear around it. And when you move through that fear, you find freedom. You no longer carry the emotional weight of needing everything to be perfect. You stop rehearsing outcomes. You stop replaying decisions. You give yourself permission to move forward without emotional residue. That is renunciation, not the giving up of life, but the giving up of inner conflict. And in that giving up, life becomes lighter, not because everything goes your way, but because you no longer demand that it must. You've stopped tying your emotional peace to outcomes you can't control, and in doing so, you've reclaimed your freedom. This is the emotional lightness that renunciation offers. Not emptiness, but clarity. Not passivity, but grounded choice. Not loss, but liberation from the invisible burdens you didn't realize you were carrying. You don't become less human through this practice. You become more alive. Because now, every step forward is clean. Every decision is honest. and every moment is free from the emotional weight of needing to be something other than it is. When the emotional burden of needing to choose, fix, and control begins to fall away, something unexpected rises in its place. Vulnerability. It's what you start to feel when there's no longer anything between you and your pain. When you're not distracting yourself with decisions, explanations, or expectations, the rawness of your emotions starts to surface, and with it comes the natural impulse to protect yourself, to fix what hurts, to shut it down, to escape. But Buddhism offers something completely different. It doesn't ask you to control your pain, it asks you to love it. This is where the path turns toward karuna, compassion, not pity, not forced forgiveness. Compassion is the courage to stay close to your own suffering and the wisdom to meet it not with fear or resistance, but with warmth. It's the part of you that holds space instead of fixing, that understands instead of judges, that softens instead of tightens. Most people grow up believing that pain must be managed, hidden, or solved. We create strategies, we form coping mechanisms, we learn to suppress, to toughen up, to perform strength instead of feeling deeply. But these strategies don't dissolve pain, they store it, they push it deeper, and that stored pain becomes tension, reactivity, and chronic emotional fatigue. Control doesn't heal trauma, it extends it. Compassion works differently. It moves in the opposite direction. It doesn't push pain away, it turns toward it. It says, "This hurts, and it's okay that it hurts." That permission is powerful, because much of your emotional suffering doesn't come from the original wound. It comes from the story that the wound shouldn't be there, from the belief that pain is a flaw, from the pressure to act fine when you're not. When you respond to pain with compassion, the inner war stops. You stop resisting what already is. You stop layering guilt on top of grief, shame on top of fear, judgment on top of sadness. You meet the pain where it lives, in your body, in your breath, in your thoughts, and you offer it space instead of force. This shift may feel subtle at first, but it has profound effects. The moment you stop fighting your pain, you begin to relax around it. You're not collapsing into it. You're not identifying with it. You're simply allowing it to exist without being rejected. And in that space, healing begins. Emotional trauma often stays alive, not because the wound is too deep, but because we keep tightening around it. Every time the memory surfaces and we tense up, we reinforce the message that the feeling is dangerous. That reaction feeds the trauma, even if we're trying to protect ourselves. But compassion brings the opposite message. It tells the nervous system, "You're safe now. You don't have to run. You can rest." That message changes everything, because what unprocessed trauma needs most isn't control, it's safety. And compassion is how safety is communicated from within. You become the one who stays, the one who doesn't flinch, the one who welcomes the emotion without needing it to disappear. This kind of inner warmth rewires emotional reflexes. When you meet anxiety with understanding instead of fear, the panic softens. When you meet sadness with tenderness instead of judgment, the ache becomes manageable. When you meet anger with curiosity instead of shame, it becomes energy you can work with instead of a force that controls you. And this isn't about doing something extraordinary. Compassion is not performance. It doesn't need to be loud. It can begin as simply as placing your hand on your chest when something hurts, or saying to yourself, "This is hard, and I'm here with it." That's not weakness, that's power. It's choosing presence over avoidance, connection over rejection. In Buddhist teaching, karuna is not limited to others. It starts with the self. You can't give to others what you won't allow yourself. If you demand perfection from your own heart, you'll demand it from others too. If you shame your own vulnerability, you'll struggle to hold anyone else's. But when you soften toward your own pain, you naturally begin to soften toward others. Your capacity for empathy grows not because you try harder, but because you've made room inside. This inner compassion becomes especially important during emotional flashbacks. When old wounds are triggered and your body responds as if the past is happening again, the instinct is often to shut down or act out. But compassion gives you a third option: to stay, to breathe, to offer your own presence as a form of support. You're no longer trying to erase the emotion. You're offering it a place to be seen and held. This transforms your relationship with discomfort. Instead of seeing it as a problem, you begin to see it as a call for attention. Emotions stop being enemies. They become signals, indicators that something inside is asking to be met, not fixed. You stop being afraid of feeling deeply because you've learned how to hold what arises without losing yourself in it. That's one of the biggest shifts compassion brings. You stop identifying with pain. You're no longer the anxiety, the sadness, the anger. You're the one witnessing it, the one holding it with care. That witnessing changes your entire internal dialogue. You start saying, "This is part of me, but it's not all of me. This hurts, but it's not who I am." That separation between emotion and identity is where healing begins. And the more you practice compassion, the more resilient you become. Not because you're avoiding breakdowns, but because you know how to meet them when they come. You trust your capacity to move through difficulty without abandoning yourself. That trust builds emotional stability. You don't need to control everything because you know you can meet whatever comes with presence. This practice also dissolves shame. So much of our pain becomes toxic when we believe it makes us bad. But when you bring compassion to those parts of yourself you've hidden, the fear, the neediness, the grief, they begin to relax, because they're no longer being attacked. They're being accepted. And acceptance is not approval, it's acknowledgement. It's the foundation for change. Compassion also allows you to forgive, not just others, but yourself, for the ways you've reacted in pain, for the mistakes you've made trying to protect yourself, for the times you didn't know how to respond. Forgiveness in this form is not forgetting, it's releasing. You stop using the past as a weapon against your own heart. You begin again, softly, with kindness. This approach reshapes how you speak to yourself. Your inner dialogue becomes less punishing, more honest. You stop demanding that you always be okay. You stop treating struggle as failure. Instead, you meet yourself like you would a friend. You say, "Of course this hurts. You've been carrying so much. It's okay to rest now." And from this softness, strength is born. Real strength. The kind that can sit with grief without running. The kind that can hold anger without exploding. The kind that can love without needing control. That strength is not forged through effort. It's uncovered through care. You also begin to see how compassion reveals truth. Because when you stop reacting defensively to your pain, you can actually hear what it's trying to say. Sadness might be pointing to something that matters. Anger might be defending a boundary. Fear might be asking for caution, not paralysis. Compassion listens. It doesn't silence emotion. It helps you understand it. In this understanding, you become emotionally wise. You know when to speak and when to stay silent, when to hold space and when to act, when to say no and when to say yes. These decisions don't come from fear or pressure. They come from clarity, and clarity grows in compassion's presence. This is how trauma heals, not all at once, but through repeated acts of self-kindness, through staying with yourself in hard moments, through choosing warmth over control, through giving your pain permission to exist without defining you. Over time, this changes your nervous system. It changes your relationships. It changes your life. You're no longer living to avoid pain. You're living from a place where pain no longer frightens you, where your emotions are not problems to be managed, but waves to be witnessed, where your heart becomes a refuge, not a battleground. This is the power of karuna, not in its ability to fix what happened, but in its ability to make peace with what's here. And in that peace, transformation becomes not only possible, but natural. Because when pain is met with love, it no longer needs to scream. It no longer needs to hide. It softens, settles, and slowly dissolves. Not because you forced it, because you stayed. When compassion becomes your natural response to pain, you stop living in fear of your inner world. The need to control fades, and the ability to stay present grows stronger. But even with this warmth toward your emotions, one question remains. How do you catch a reaction before it hijacks your entire state of mind? How do you meet your experience before it becomes a storm? The answer lies in something subtle yet powerful: mindfulness of feelings. This teaching comes directly from the Satipatthana Sutta, one of the foundational texts in Buddhist practice. It speaks of Vedana, the feeling tone that arises with every experience. Before thought, before emotion, before identity, there is sensation, and that sensation carries a tone: pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. These tones are the first spark in the chain of reaction, and learning to observe them with mindfulness is what allows you to intervene before the flame becomes a fire. Mindfulness of feelings is not about emotions in the way we usually talk about them. It's not about sadness, joy, or anger as full stories. It's about the raw, immediate texture of experience as it contacts the mind. That first flash of discomfort when someone speaks sharply. That tiny pulse of pleasure when you're praised. That subtle boredom in a quiet moment. These are not yet stories. They are the pre-verbal signals that shape what comes next. Most of the time, these tones pass unnoticed. The moment you feel an unpleasant sensation, the mind jumps in with a narrative. They disrespected me. This always happens. I can't believe this again. But the story doesn't come first. What comes first is the spark, the feeling tone. And when mindfulness is developed at that level, you can meet the spark before it becomes flame. This is the missing link between awareness and reaction. Without mindfulness of feeling, you're always one step too late. The emotion has already taken shape. The thoughts have already formed. The identification has already occurred. But when you can see Vedana clearly, you create space. And in that space, you find freedom. This freedom is not theoretical, it's practical. You begin to notice, this is unpleasant. That simple recognition creates a pause. And in that pause, you don't have to react. You don't have to push it away. You don't have to feed it. You just stay with the raw experience. You feel it as sensation, tightness, warmth, pressure, numbness. The body becomes your field of insight, not a battlefield. When this mindfulness is strong, you stop confusing discomfort with danger. You stop confusing pleasure with obligation. You stop letting neutral sensations become unconscious boredom. Each feeling tone becomes an opportunity to stay, to breathe, to observe. This level of attention reveals how much of your suffering is not from what happens, but from what you do with that first spark. The unpleasant tone becomes irritation, then anger, then a fight. The pleasant tone becomes desire, then craving, then attachment. The neutral tone becomes dullness, then disconnection, then apathy. But none of these outcomes are automatic. They are trained responses. And with mindfulness, you can retrain them. You can learn to rest in the feeling without turning it into something else. You can say, "This is pleasant," without needing to keep it. "This is unpleasant," without needing to avoid it. "This is neutral," without drifting into distraction. This is equanimity at its root level, not emotional numbness, but clarity of contact. And this clarity has a ripple effect. When you don't react to the feeling tone, you prevent the cascade of thoughts that usually follow. You stop building stories. You stop assigning blame. You stop fueling identities. You experience without possession. You allow without resistance. This changes how you relate to your own mind. You begin to see feelings not as truths, but as signals. They don't need to be obeyed. They need to be understood. You can say, "This is what it feels like to be triggered," without becoming the trigger. "This is what it feels like to be praised," without chasing validation. You observe the rise and fall without clinging to the content. The practice starts small. In daily life, when something stirs you, a sound, a comment, a look, pause. Before your thoughts take over, feel the tone. Is it pleasant? Is it painful? Is it neutral? Label it softly. Stay there. Don't rush to make meaning. Don't rush to fix or change it. Just rest with the raw data of your experience. This may sound simple, but it's deeply transformative. Because what you're doing is breaking the chain of papanka, the mental proliferation that turns a moment into a maze. You stop adding layers. You stop escalating the feeling. You return to simplicity, sensation, contact, breath. Over time, you become less afraid of feeling, because you're no longer overwhelmed by what feelings become. You meet them early. You hold them gently. You watch them change. This is not suppression. It's skill. It's training the mind to stay close to reality instead of running off into reaction. This skill is especially useful in conflict. When someone says something that lands hard, your first impulse is often to react. But with mindfulness of feeling, you notice the unpleasant tone. You feel the sharpness, the contraction, the heat. And instead of defending or attacking, you breathe. You let the feeling unfold without adding blame. That pause can save relationships. It can prevent regret. It can turn a fight into a moment of understanding. This practice also helps with emotional cravings. When a pleasant feeling arises, the mind often wants to hold on to it, to repeat it, to possess it. But craving leads to attachment, and attachment leads to suffering. Mindfulness interrupts this chain. You feel the pleasure, you enjoy it, but you don't need it to stay. You don't make it your identity. You let it pass. Neutral feelings are often the hardest. Because they don't grab your attention, they invite boredom or mindlessness. But when you stay mindful of them, you begin to see their value. You notice how peace often hides in neutrality, how the space between highs and lows is where stability lives. You stop chasing stimulation. You start appreciating stillness. This appreciation becomes the ground for deeper presence. You're no longer riding waves of reaction. You're standing in the ocean, grounded, watching, feeling, breathing. And this steadiness becomes your new baseline. Not a fixed emotion, but a balanced awareness. A state where feelings are welcome, but not worshipped. Mindfulness of feeling also reveals the universal nature of experience. You start to see how all beings are moved by the same tones, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. That insight builds compassion. You recognize that everyone is reacting to their own Vedana, often unconsciously. You don't take it personally. You don't judge as quickly. You understand. And that understanding changes how you speak, how you listen, how you respond. You bring more patience, more presence, more care. Because you're not lost in your own reactivity. You're aware of the feeling, and you're choosing your next move with intention. This practice becomes a shield, not from pain, but from unnecessary suffering. It protects your peace by giving you space, the space to feel without flinching, to experience without escaping, to be here in your body, in this moment, with this exact tone, and nothing added. And as that skill deepens, your mind becomes quieter, not because feelings stop, but because you've stopped turning them into noise. You've stopped fearing them. You've stopped needing to make them anything other than what they are. This is how mindfulness saves you from spiraling, not through force, through presence, through attention, through the simple act of staying with your feeling before it becomes your identity. Because once you see clearly that you are not your reactions, not your sensations, not even your emotions, but the awareness that holds them, everything begins to settle. Not because life is easier, because your mind is steadier. When mindfulness of feelings becomes part of your daily experience, life starts to slow down in the best way. You stop being pulled by every emotional tone, every mental impulse. You witness the space between sensation and story, and that space becomes your freedom. But even with this level of awareness, the emotional landscape can still carry subtle noise, residue from years of reacting, clinging, fearing, striving. This noise may be quiet, but it's persistent, and if you want to go deeper into emotional purification, the path leads further inward. This is where the jhanas begin to unfold. The jhanas are not some mystical escape reserved for monks or spiritual elites. They are deeply human experiences. In Buddhist meditation, they are states of refined concentration, each one more subtle and still than the last. But their true value lies not just in their tranquility, but in what they reveal and release about the emotional patterns that usually hide below the surface. These aren't just pleasant states to get lost in. They are a mirror and a cleansing fire. Entering the first jhana requires only one thing: sustained attention on a single object, usually the breath, and the willingness to stay with it without distraction. This effort burns off the surface-level distractions of the mind. Your usual stories, complaints, worries, they don't vanish, but they lose their grip. There's too much steadiness now. You're beginning to settle. And with that settling, something opens. You start to taste what it means to exist without inner conflict. The first jhana is marked by two qualities: applied thought and sustained thought. This means the mind continues to place itself on the object and remain there. Emotionally, this feels like training a wild animal to rest, not by force, but by consistency. You begin to feel the emotional noise quiet, not because you solved it, but because your attention is no longer feeding it. The endless thinking, the reactivity, it pauses. As the mind deepens into this state, joy arises, not from anything happening in the outside world, but from the very act of being still. This joy is clean. It's not excitement. It's not stimulation. It's a subtle happiness that comes from non-struggle, and with it comes an emotional lesson. Joy doesn't have to be earned. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It arises naturally when the mind is unified. Moving into the second jhana, even applied and sustained thought drop away. The mind no longer has to place itself. It stays effortlessly. The joy remains, but now it deepens into a more refined sense of pleasure. Emotionally, This is where clinging begins to burn away. Because the joy is so full, there's nothing to chase, nothing to fear. You experience the radical truth that nothing external is needed for emotional peace. All tension around wanting begins to loosen. This loosening isn't just about desire. It touches fear too. Fear often hides beneath craving. Fear of loss, fear of not being enough, fear of impermanence. But here, in stillness, the fear finds no place to land. You're not holding anything, so there's nothing to lose. The emotional system starts to rewire itself. It learns what peace without condition feels like. In the third jhana, even joy begins to fade. Not because it's rejected, but because it's no longer needed. What remains is contentment, a deep, quiet happiness that has no movement in it. This is where emotional balance stabilizes. The highs and lows flatten into equanimity. You stop swinging between excitement and disappointment. You rest in what is. And this resting is powerful. It shows you what the nervous system is like when it's not reacting to anything. You see how unnecessary most of your emotional habits were. The tension, the planning, the proving. They were all compensating for a peace that was already available. You're learning, not intellectually but viscerally, that presence is enough. As the mind continues into the fourth jhana, even the contentment becomes so subtle that it too dissolves. What's left is purity of mindfulness and equanimity. No joy, no sadness, just clarity, just balance. Emotionally, this is profound. It's not emptiness in a cold way, it's openness. There's no resistance, no pulling or pushing. Every emotion that might arise is seen instantly, but none of it sticks. It all passes like clouds across a sky that never changes. This level of clarity is deeply healing. Because you begin to see exactly how emotion arises, peaks, and fades. You see the moment clinging starts, and you don't follow it. You feel the edge of frustration, and you don't tense around it. You experience the first note of fear, but you don't build a story. The emotional noise that once felt like your baseline now seems foreign, optional. You're no longer reacting, you're resting. And the purification that happens here isn't dramatic. It's quiet, but it's deep. You're not fixing your emotions, you're seeing through them. You're watching them arise without needing to be them. That separation changes everything. It dissolves emotional identity. You stop being an angry person, or a fearful person, or an anxious person. You just become someone who experiences what comes and lets it go. The jhanas teach the body and mind to trust stillness, not as a performance, but as a way of being. And from this stillness, when you return to ordinary consciousness, something fundamental has shifted. You may still feel frustration, but it doesn't possess you. You may still experience desire, but it doesn't burn. You have felt the depth of peace, and now you know what's real. This knowing changes how you live. You move more slowly, not because you're lazy, but because you're not rushing to escape your own mind. You speak more carefully, not because you're afraid, but because you've seen the power of silence. You become more available to others, not by effort, but because you're no longer entangled in your own emotional static. You begin to feel what freedom truly means, not in a grand spiritual way, but in the moment-to-moment clarity of not reacting, of being able to feel without falling, to care without clinging, to act without attachment. That's the emotional purification the jhanas offer. Not escape, but insight. Not numbness, but refinement. And this refinement is not fragile. It doesn't depend on the perfect environment. It's not only available on a cushion. It can be carried into your work, your relationships, your struggles. Because once the mind has experienced that depth of stillness, it remembers. Even in chaos, it remembers how to return. The emotional resilience that comes from jhana isn't loud. It's quiet strength, the kind that doesn't react to every spark, the kind that knows the difference between what needs attention and what needs to pass, the kind that feels everything, but isn't destroyed by anything. This is how the jhanas purify emotional noise. They don't push anything away. They invite you deeper, layer by layer, until what's left is just presence, clear, balanced, free, not because life has changed, but because you have. When emotional noise dissolves through deep stillness and the inner world becomes steady and clear, something surprising often begins to surface. It's not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle sense that some feelings don't belong to your current experience. A fear with no clear origin, a sadness that doesn't match your life, a persistent emotional pattern that seems older than your memories. This isn't superstition or fantasy. Buddhism offers an explanation rooted in the continuity of consciousness, the teachings on rebirth, and the karmic echoes that flow between lives. In Buddhist understanding, rebirth is not the movement of a soul from one body to another. It's the continuity of mind, a stream, not a solid object. Each life is a moment in that stream, shaped by intentions, actions, and impressions. When death occurs, the body ends, but the momentum of mind continues. What passes on are not memories as we know them, but tendencies, imprints, energies, emotional seeds that didn't fully bloom, now waiting for their conditions to ripen. Whether one takes rebirth as literal or symbolic, its emotional meaning holds weight. The idea that certain emotional patterns can echo across time, beyond just one body or lifetime, brings both a challenge and a liberation. The challenge is this: you might be carrying something you didn't start. The liberation is this: you don't have to keep carrying it. Some fears seem disproportionate because they were not born from this lifetime's events. A person with a secure life might still feel constantly unsafe. A person raised in love may still struggle with unexplainable abandonment. When seen through the lens of rebirth, these emotions may be residues of past karmic impressions, unresolved responses from another chapter of consciousness. These impressions, known as vasanas, shape emotional memory. They form patterns of reactivity that feel deeply personal, but often arise without present cause. You find yourself repeating the same type of relationship dynamic, falling into the same emotional spirals, facing the same kind of loss again and again, without knowing why. The repetition suggests a lesson not yet fully understood, a pattern not yet fully released. This doesn't mean everything difficult in your life is caused by past lives, but the perspective opens up a new way to work with stuck emotions. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this trying to show me that I haven't seen yet?" That question alone shifts the energy from victimhood to awareness. When these emotional patterns arise, they often carry a quality of familiarity. Even if the situation is new, the emotional texture is not. It feels like something you've known forever. This familiarity can be painful, but it's also an invitation. It means the mind is presenting an opportunity, a chance to meet what you couldn't meet before, a chance to choose differently. And choosing differently is how karma is transformed, not through punishment, but through clarity. The emotions that echo through lifetimes don't ask for more effort. They ask for more presence, more honesty, more willingness to feel without collapsing. For example, If a person has a deep tendency toward guilt that doesn't match their current life, they may be working with an unresolved karmic imprint, not a punishment, but an echo of past harm or loss that was never integrated. When they try to suppress it, the guilt becomes heavier. When they try to rationalize it, the mind becomes confused. But when they meet it with mindfulness and compassion, something begins to open. The echo begins to lose strength when it is met fully. This is where meditative awareness becomes essential. In deep practice, memories may not arise as images or stories, but as sensations: tightness, sadness, resistance, longing. The body holds what the mind forgets. Sitting with these sensations without needing to explain them allows them to unfold. And in that unfolding, the buried imprint begins to dissolve. This process isn't about uncovering dramatic past life stories. It's about freeing yourself from emotional loops that keep repeating. You don't need to remember your past lives to heal their impact. You need to be present enough to see when an emotion belongs to something older than the moment, and strong enough to stay with it until it completes. That completion doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like a quiet release, a breath that finally comes after years of holding it in, a realization that you no longer need to prove, protect, or perform the identity that was shaped around that emotion. The pattern fades, not because it was defeated, but because it was no longer needed. This teaching also brings a deep sense of forgiveness, not just for others, but for yourself. If you're carrying emotional burdens that don't make sense in your current context, you can stop blaming yourself. You can stop thinking you're broken. You're not broken. You're carrying old karma that now has a chance to be resolved. And that's not a curse. It's a gift, because not everyone gets the awareness or tools to do this kind of work. Working with rebirth in this way also builds patience. Emotional healing is no longer seen as something that must be completed in a single moment, relationship, or even a single life. You stop rushing your process. You stop comparing your pace to others. You understand that your journey is part of a much larger flow, one that includes unseen histories and future potential. This patience becomes a form of peace, a trust in timing, a respect for the depth of your own path. There's also a deep humility in recognizing that we've likely been many things: victim, perpetrator, healer, destroyer. And the emotions we carry now may be residues of all those roles. This humility softens judgment. It opens the heart. It dissolves the illusion of being separate from others. If you've lived many lives, so have they. If you've carried pain, so have they. If you're trying to learn through emotion, so are they. From this view, forgiveness becomes more natural, not because harm doesn't matter, but because you see the larger tapestry. You see how karma connects lives, how pain passes through generations, how healing for one becomes healing for many. When you work with your emotional karma, you're not just freeing yourself, you're breaking patterns that ripple outward. This also transforms how you view fear, especially the kind that lingers in the background of your life. Fear of abandonment, of rejection, of loss, of emptiness. These fears might not match your story, but they match your karmic energy. And when you meet them directly, not as problems but as echoes, you begin to soften them. They stop ruling your choices. They stop hiding behind distractions. And as fear softens, the natural clarity of your mind begins to return. The emotional weight that felt permanent begins to lift. You don't need to be free of karma to feel peace. You need to stop identifying with the emotional residue it leaves behind. You can say, this fear may not have started here, but it ends here. That choice, made again and again, becomes a liberation. The idea of rebirth also expands compassion beyond time. You begin to care not just for this version of yourself, but for the whole arc of your being. You tend to your current emotions as if you are also tending to the parts of you that didn't know how. You hold space not just for this life's wounds, but for the ancient grief, the forgotten shame, the hidden strength. And that care becomes your practice. Every time you meet a recurring emotional pattern with patience instead of resistance, you are ending a cycle. Every time you bring loving awareness to pain that feels older than your current self, you are freeing not just your heart, but the consciousness that has been waiting for your presence. Whether or not you believe in literal rebirth is not the point. The emotional truth is the same. Some wounds are old, some reactions are inherited, some fears do not come from here, but they can end here, with you, with your awareness, with your willingness to stay, to see, and to let go. This is how emotional memory is purified, not through control, but through understanding. Not through erasing the past, but through releasing the need to carry it into every present moment. And in that release, something ancient and silent finally rests. Not because it was solved, but because it was seen, fully, lovingly, and completely. You've just walked through over 3 hours of timeless wisdom, teachings not meant to decorate your intellect, but to reshape the way you experience every emotion, every breath, every moment of your life. From the piercing clarity of the second arrow to the deep silence that softens the loudest wounds. From the ancient karmic grooves that formed your reflexes to the quiet dissolving of emotional noise in jhanic stillness. Each lesson wasn't about escaping pain, but seeing it clearly, holding it gently, and releasing it wisely. You've seen that emotions are not enemies to defeat, nor identities to cling to. They are weather in the sky of your awareness, rising, passing, never who you truly are. Buddhism doesn't offer quick fixes. It offers tools for transformation, and if you've made it this far, you're already changing. You're not just consuming content, you're learning how to live with clarity, depth, and compassion. So now, pause for a moment and ask yourself, which lesson whispered something to you? Which truth did your heart recognize? Leave a comment below and share just one insight that stayed with you. That one reflection could be the light someone else needs. And if this journey helped you breathe easier, see clearer, or feel more grounded in your own mind, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next step. Because this path of awakening, it doesn't end here. It deepens, one breath at a time. Thank you for listening. Keep going. You're not alone on this path.